Did you know that Family Guy was actually canceled twice by Fox and nearly became lost media forever? Or that Seth MacFarlane almost died in the September 11th attacks but missed his flight because of a hangover? Welcome to the bizarre, twisted, and absolutely fascinating world of Family Guy lore that most fans have never heard about. I'm talking about secrets so wild that they make the show's most outrageous episodes look tame by comparison. We're diving deep into the creation myths, the behind-the-scenes drama, the near-death experiences, and the corporate battles that shaped one of television's most controversial animated series. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never watch Family Guy the same way again. Let's start with something that will blow your mind. Seth MacFarlane, the creator and voice of Peter Griffin, Brian, and Stewie, was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 1-1 on September 11th, 2001. That's right, the same flight that crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. But here's the crazy part. He overslept because he was hungover from a party the night before and his travel agent had given him the wrong departure time. If he had made that flight, Family Guy would never have existed beyond its first season, and animation history would be completely different. But that's just the beginning of this incredible story. Family Guy has one of the most bizarre resurrection tales in television history. The show premiered in 1999 and was actually performing decently in the ratings, but Fox kept moving it around to different time slots. You know how networks love to do that, right? Well, they moved it so many times that viewers couldn't keep track of when it was on. Eventually, Fox canceled it in 2002 after just 3 seasons. Here's where it gets interesting, though. While the show was dead on television, something magical was happening in the afterlife. Adult Swim picked up the syndication rights and started airing reruns late at night. College students and young adults discovered the show and fell in love with it. At the same time, DVD sales were going through the roof. The first season DVD became one of the best-selling TV show DVDs of all time, and suddenly Fox realized they had made a massive mistake. So in 2005, Fox did something almost unprecedented in television history. They brought back a canceled show based purely on DVD sales and cable reruns. Family Guy became the first show ever to be revived solely because of its success in syndication and home video. It was like watching a TV show literally rise from the dead. But the resurrection story gets even weirder. When Fox brought the show back, they didn't just order a few episodes to test the waters. They ordered 53 new episodes right off the bat. That's an enormous vote of confidence for a show that had already been canceled once. Seth MacFarlane suddenly went from unemployed animator to one of the most powerful people in Hollywood practically overnight. Now let's talk about the creative origins of the show, because they're absolutely fascinating. Seth MacFarlane created Family Guy when he was just 24 years old, fresh out of the Rhode Island School of Design. But here's what most people don't know. The show was originally pitched as a much more traditional family sitcom. The early concepts were way more grounded and realistic than what we ended up with. The character of Peter Griffin was originally going to be much more like a typical TV dad, still bumbling and overweight, but not the complete psychopath we know and love today. Stewie wasn't even going to be particularly smart or evil in the original concept. He was just going to be a regular baby with maybe slightly advanced vocabulary. Brian was going to be a normal dog who occasionally made witty observations but wasn't going to be a full conversation partner for the family. What changed everything was Seth MacFarlane's love of old Hollywood and classic animation. He grew up watching Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, and classic Disney cartoons, and he wanted to bring that level of visual comedy and surreal humor to primetime television. The problem was that most networks were terrified of anything too weird or experimental. Fox, however, was in a unique position in the late 90s. The Simpsons had proven that animated shows could work in prime time, but Fox was still considered the edgy, rebellious network. They were willing to take risks that ABC, CBS, and NBC would never consider. So when Seth pitched his cartoon about a dysfunctional family in Rhode Island, Fox was intrigued enough to order a pilot. The pilot episode is actually incredibly different from the show we know today. The animation style was cruder, the jokes were more straightforward, and the characters hadn't yet developed their extreme personalities. If you watch that original pilot, you can barely recognize it as the same show. It's like looking at baby photos of a celebrity. You can kind of see the resemblance, but it's clearly a work in progress. One of the most fascinating aspects of Family Guy's development is how the characters evolved over time. Take Stewie, for example. In the early seasons, he was genuinely trying to kill Lois and take over the world. His evil schemes were the driving force behind many episodes. But as the show went on, the writers realized that Stewie was funnier when he was dealing with more relatable problems, like sexuality, relationships, and growing up. This evolution wasn't accidental. It reflected Seth MacFarlane's own growth as a writer and person. When he created Stewie, MacFarlane was a young, single guy who thought evil baby plots were hilarious. But as he got older and more experienced, he realized that character-driven comedy was more sustainable than pure shock value. The same thing happened with Brian. Originally, he was just the voice of reason in the Griffin household, the one sane character who could comment on everyone else's craziness. But over time, the writers started exploring Brian's flaws and insecurities, turning him into one of the most complex characters on television. His pretentiousness, his failed writing career, his drinking problem, all of these traits developed organically as the show matured. Speaking of character development, let's talk about some of the inspiration behind the Griffin family. Peter Griffin was actually based on a security guard that Seth MacFarlane worked with during a summer job. The guy was loud, obnoxious, and completely inappropriate, but somehow lovable at the same time. MacFarlane found himself fascinated by how someone could be so offensive yet still maintain friendships and a family. Lois was inspired by MacFarlane's own mother, but also by the classic TV mom archetype. The twist was making her come from a wealthy family, which allowed the writers to explore themes of class and privilege. It also gave them an excuse to put the Griffins in situations they normally couldn't afford, like fancy parties and expensive vacations. The supporting characters have equally interesting origins. Glenn Quagmire was originally supposed to be a minor character who appeared in maybe 1 or 2 episodes, but Seth MacFarlane's voice performance was so distinctive and memorable that the writers kept bringing him back. The giggity giggity catchphrase wasn't even scripted. MacFarlane improvised it during recording, and everyone thought it was so funny that they made it Quagmire's signature sound. Cleveland Brown started as a simple background character, but MacFarlane realized that having a calm, reasonable neighbor made Peter's craziness even funnier by contrast. The character became so popular that he eventually got his own spin-off show, though that's a whole other story of corporate politics and creative struggles. One of the most controversial aspects of Family Guy is its use of cutaway gags, those random flashbacks that have nothing to do with the main plot. Some critics hate them, calling them lazy writing and cheap laughs. But here's the thing. Those cutaways were actually inspired by some of the most sophisticated comedy ever created. Seth MacFarlane grew up watching Monty Python's Flying Circus, and he was fascinated by how the Pythons would interrupt their sketches with completely random animations and non-sequiturs. He also loved the Marx Brothers movies, where the plot would screech to a halt for a musical number or a bizarre comedy bit that had nothing to do with anything else. The cutaway gags serve a specific purpose in Family Guy's comedy structure. They allow the writers to do jokes that would be impossible within the constraints of a normal sitcom plot. Want to make fun of a celebrity or reference an obscure movie? Just have Peter say, "This reminds me of the time I," and cut to whatever crazy scenario you can imagine. But here's something most fans don't realize. Many of those cutaways are actually incredibly expensive to produce. Each one requires new character designs, new backgrounds, new voice acting, and sometimes even new music. A single 30-second cutaway can cost more to animate than an entire scene of regular dialogue. Fox executives were initially horrified by how much money the show was spending on these seemingly throwaway jokes. The financial aspect of Family Guy is actually one of the most interesting parts of its story. When the show first premiered, animation was still considered a niche market for adults. The Simpsons was successful, but it was seen as a unique exception rather than proof that there was a broader market for animated comedy. Family Guy's success helped prove that there was actually a huge appetite for adult animated shows. This paved the way for series like American Dad, The Cleveland Show, Archer, Rick and Morty, and countless others. Without Family Guy's commercial success, the entire landscape of adult animation might look completely different today. The merchandising aspect is equally fascinating. Family Guy products generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year. T-shirts, toys, video games, Christmas ornaments, you name it, and there's probably a Family Guy version of it. The Stewie character alone has spawned an entire industry of baby-themed merchandise with surprisingly dark humor. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of Family Guy's cultural impact is how it changed the way we think about offensive comedy. The show pushes boundaries that would have been unthinkable on television even 10 years before it premiered. Yet somehow, it manages to get away with jokes that would destroy other shows. The secret is in the show's self-awareness. Family Guy knows that it's offensive, and it's constantly making jokes about its own offensiveness. When Peter does something terrible, the other characters usually call him out on it. When the show makes a controversial reference, it often follows it up with a joke about how inappropriate the reference was. This meta-humor creates a kind of protective bubble around the show's more controversial content. Viewers understand that they're not supposed to take Peter Griffin seriously as a role model. He's clearly meant to be a cautionary tale about what happens when someone has no filter and no self-awareness. The voice acting on Family Guy deserves its own deep dive because it's honestly incredible. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 of the main characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Glenn Quagmire, plus dozens of supporting characters and celebrity impersonations. His range is absolutely mind-blowing when you really think about it. But here's what's even more impressive. MacFarlane often records conversations between his own characters. That means he's essentially having entire dramatic scenes with himself, switching between voices and maintaining the emotional continuity of multiple characters simultaneously. It's like watching a one-man theater performance every time you see Peter and Brian have a heart-to-heart conversation. The other voice actors are equally talented. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, also does dozens of supporting characters, including the Griffin's maid Consuela. Mila Kunis took over the voice of Meg after the first season, and her performance evolved from simple teenager dialogue to some of the show's most emotionally complex moments. Seth Green voices Chris Griffin, and his portrayal perfectly captures that awkward teenage energy. Green actually ad-libs a lot of Chris's dialogue, particularly the character's weird sound effects and random observations. Many of Chris's funniest moments come from Green just improvising during recording sessions. The show's relationship with Fox has always been complicated and fascinating. On one hand, Family Guy makes enormous amounts of money for the network. On the other hand, it constantly creates controversy and pushes the boundaries of what's acceptable on broadcast television. There have been numerous instances where Fox executives have asked the writers to tone down certain jokes or storylines. Sometimes the writers comply, but often they find creative ways to work around the censorship. This has led to some incredibly clever wordplay and visual innuendo that's actually funnier than whatever the original joke was going to be. The international success of Family Guy is another interesting chapter in its story. The show airs in dozens of countries around the world, and each market has its own unique censorship challenges. Some countries cut entire scenes, while others dub over offensive dialogue with completely different jokes. In some markets, Stewie's sexuality is completely removed from his character arc. In others, references to religion or politics are heavily edited. This has created dozens of different versions of the show, each tailored to local sensitivities and cultural norms. Looking at Family Guy's legacy today, it's clear that the show fundamentally changed television comedy. It proved that audiences were hungry for more experimental, boundary-pushing content. It showed that animation could be a vehicle for sophisticated adult humor, not just children's entertainment. The show also pioneered many techniques that are now standard in comedy writing. The use of pop culture references as comedic shorthand, the mixing of high and low culture, the willingness to completely abandon plot for the sake of a good joke. These are all techniques that you can see in countless comedies today. But perhaps most importantly, Family Guy proved that television shows could have multiple lives. The fact that it survived cancellation and came back stronger than ever showed other creators that there were new paths to success beyond traditional network approval. As we wrap up this deep dive into Family Guy lore, it's worth noting that the show is still evolving and changing. Seth MacFarlane has stepped back from day-to-day involvement to focus on other projects, but the show continues under new leadership. Each season brings new controversies, new characters, and new ways to push the boundaries of what's possible on television. Whether you love it or hate it, Family Guy has left an indelible mark on popular culture. It's a show that dared to be different, survived multiple attempts to kill it, and emerged as one of the most successful and influential comedies of the modern era. And honestly, that's pretty giggity if you ask me. Did you know that Family Guy was actually dead and buried for 3 entire years? And when it came back from the grave, it changed television forever in ways you probably never realized? Stick around because what I'm about to tell you about the hidden depths of Family Guy will completely change how you see this seemingly simple cartoon. Most people think Family Guy is just random jokes and cutaway gags. But there's a secret layer of storytelling, hidden references, and behind-the-scenes drama that would make your head spin. From secret government conspiracies to real-world tragedies that shaped entire episodes, this show has more dark secrets than you might imagine. Let's start with something that sounds like a conspiracy theory but is absolutely true. Family Guy predicted major world events with scary accuracy. And I'm not talking about lucky guesses. We're talking about specific details that aired months or even years before they actually happened in real life. Remember the episode where Peter accidentally damages a bridge? That episode aired in 2005, showing a bridge collapse in remarkable detail. Less than 2 years later, the Minneapolis bridge collapse happened in almost identical circumstances. Coincidence? Maybe. But wait, there's more. The show also depicted airport security scenarios that became reality after major policy changes. Episodes showing specific security procedures aired before those exact procedures were implemented in real airports. Either Seth MacFarlane is a time traveler, or the writers were paying very close attention to patterns most people missed. But here's where it gets really weird. The show once depicted a very specific type of terrorist attack involving planes, and this aired before certain real-world events that I can't get too detailed about without this video getting demonetized. The point is, Family Guy wasn't just making random jokes about current events. They were somehow tapping into the collective unconscious of what was coming next. Now let's talk about the show's death and resurrection, because this story is wilder than any episode plot. Family Guy was canceled in 2002 after just 3 seasons. Fox executives thought it was done forever, but here's what they didn't expect. The DVD sales went absolutely insane. People were buying Family Guy DVDs like crazy, and more importantly, Adult Swim started running reruns that pulled in massive ratings. Fox realized they had made a huge mistake. The show wasn't just popular. It was building a cult following that was growing stronger every day it was off the air. When Family Guy came back in 2005, something had fundamentally changed. The writers knew they had been given a second chance, and they went absolutely wild with it. The humor got darker, the references got more obscure, and they started breaking the fourth wall in ways that no animated show had ever done before. But here's the part that most fans don't know. The cancellation and resurrection created a split personality within the show itself. There's pre-cancellation Family Guy and post-cancellation Family Guy, and they're almost like 2 different shows entirely. Pre-cancellation Family Guy was more grounded. Sure, it was weird, but the characters felt like real people with real problems. Post-cancellation Family Guy became something else entirely. It became a commentary on television itself. A show that was constantly aware it was a show. This shift created what television historians now call the meta-revolution. Family Guy showed other animated shows that you could break every rule, reference your own existence, and make fun of the very network that pays you and still be successful. South Park, Rick and Morty, and countless other shows followed this blueprint. Speaking of breaking rules, let's talk about the episodes that almost didn't make it to air. There's a whole vault of Family Guy content that was deemed too controversial, too dark, or too legally problematic to broadcast. Some of these episodes have become legendary among fans who have never seen them. One infamous episode dealt with a real-world tragedy in such a specific way that it would have caused massive backlash. The episode was fully animated, voiced, and scored, but it was pulled at the last minute. Only a handful of people have ever seen it, and they're bound by non-disclosure agreements. Another banned episode featured a storyline that involved real political figures in scenarios that would have caused international incidents. The legal department shut it down so hard that even mentioning specific details could result in lawsuits. But here's what's fascinating about these banned episodes. They show just how far Seth MacFarlane and his team were willing to push boundaries. They weren't just making a cartoon. They were conducting social experiments to see what society would tolerate. This brings us to one of the most interesting aspects of Family Guy lore: the show's relationship with censorship and standards. Every episode that makes it to air represents hundreds of battles fought behind the scenes between the writers and network executives. The writers developed an elaborate system for getting controversial content past the censors. They would intentionally include material they knew would be rejected, so that when they fought to keep the stuff they really wanted, it would seem reasonable by comparison. It's psychological warfare disguised as comedy writing. This strategy works so well that other shows started copying it. The Family Guy approach to dealing with censorship became the industry standard for pushing boundaries on television. Now let's dive into the character origins, because the backstories of these characters are way darker and more complex than you'd expect from a comedy show. Peter Griffin wasn't always the lovable idiot we know today. In early concept art and scripts, he was genuinely disturbing, almost psychopathic in his behavior. The writers had to gradually soften Peter's character because test audiences found him genuinely unlikable. But traces of that original darker Peter still show up in certain episodes, creating this weird cognitive dissonance where you're laughing at someone who, if you really think about it, should probably be in prison. Stewie's character evolution is even more interesting. He was originally conceived as a pure villain, a baby bent on world domination with no redeeming qualities. But as the show progressed, the writers started exploring what would make a baby want to destroy everything, and they discovered something profound about childhood trauma and family dynamics. The gradual softening of Stewie from villain to complex character represents one of the most sophisticated character development arcs in television comedy. But it happens so slowly that most viewers didn't even notice it was happening. Brian's character might be the most tragic of all. He represents the writer's own struggles with depression, alcoholism, and the feeling of being trapped in a life that doesn't match your dreams. Every time Brian has an existential crisis, it's the writers working through their own psychological issues on screen. This is why Brian's temporary death hit fans so hard. It wasn't just killing off a character, it was the writers symbolically killing off the part of themselves that they saw in Brian. When they brought him back, it represented their own decision to keep fighting through depression and creative frustration. The show's relationship with its own success is another layer of complexity that most fans miss. Family Guy became so popular that it started influencing real-world culture, but this success created a feedback loop that began changing the show itself. References to Family Guy started showing up in other TV shows, movies, and even news broadcasts. Politicians started making Family Guy references in speeches. The show went from commenting on culture to actually shaping culture, and this shift is reflected in the later seasons. The writers became increasingly aware that they were creating cultural touchstones, and this awareness changed how they approached comedy. Jokes that might have been throwaway gags in early seasons became carefully crafted cultural commentary in later seasons. This evolution created what media scholars call the recursive effect, where a piece of media becomes so influential that it starts commenting on its own influence. Family Guy didn't just break the fourth wall, it demolished the entire theater. Let's talk about the real-world consequences of Family Guy's cultural impact. The show has been credited with changing how people communicate, particularly in how they use pop culture references in everyday conversation. Before Family Guy, pop culture references in conversation were usually recent and obvious. After Family Guy, people started making increasingly obscure references, creating entire conversations that were essentially elaborate chains of cultural callbacks. This changed how humor works in social situations. The show also influenced how other media uses cutaway gags and non sequiturs. Everything from commercials to political campaigns started using Family Guy-style random humor to grab attention and create memorable moments. But perhaps the most significant impact was on censorship standards across all media. Family Guy pushed boundaries so consistently and successfully that it expanded what was considered acceptable on television. Shows that came after could go places that wouldn't have been possible before Family Guy paved the way. The voice acting in Family Guy deserves its own deep dive because there are layers of performance art happening that most people completely miss. Seth MacFarlane doesn't just voice multiple characters. He creates distinct psychological profiles for each voice that reflect different aspects of his own personality. Peter represents 10. MacFarlane's id, his impulse-driven, consequence-ignoring side. Brian represents his superego, his intellectual, morally concerned side. Stewie represents his ego, his ambitious, attention-seeking side. The show is essentially one person having a conversation with different aspects of himself. This psychological complexity extends to the guest voices as well. When celebrities appear on Family Guy, they're not just doing celebrity cameos. They're being integrated into this complex psychological ecosystem that MacFarlane has created. The show's approach to celebrity culture is particularly sophisticated. Rather than just making fun of celebrities, Family Guy examines the psychological impact of fame on both celebrities and the people who consume celebrity culture. This brings us to one of the most overlooked aspects of Family Guy, its commentary on media consumption itself. The show constantly references other TV shows, movies, and cultural phenomena, but it's not just making references for the sake of references. Each reference serves as a commentary on how media shapes our understanding of reality. When Peter acts out scenes from movies, he's demonstrating how deeply fictional narratives penetrate real human behavior. When the show parodies other TV shows, it's examining how different formats and styles influence how we process information. The cutaway gags aren't random interruptions. They're demonstrations of how the human mind actually works. We don't think in linear narratives. We think in associations, tangents, and random connections. Family Guy mirrors the actual structure of human consciousness. This psychological accuracy is why the show resonates so deeply with audiences. It's not just funny, it's cognitively familiar. The chaos of Family Guy matches the chaos of our own internal mental experience. The show's treatment of social issues is another area where there's more depth than meets the eye. While Family Guy often appears to make jokes at the expense of sensitive topics, careful analysis reveals a more complex approach to social commentary. The show uses humor to make serious points more palatable, but it also uses humor to expose the absurdity of certain social attitudes. When characters make prejudiced statements, they're usually portrayed as idiotic or ignorant, effectively undermining the attitudes they're expressing. This technique allows the show to address controversial topics without preaching, but it also creates ambiguity about what the show actually believes. This ambiguity is intentional, forcing viewers to think critically about the issues being presented rather than passively accepting predetermined conclusions. As we wrap up this exploration of Family Guy's hidden depths, it's worth considering what this all means for the future of comedy in television. Family Guy didn't just entertain audiences. It fundamentally changed what television could be and do. The show proved that audiences were hungry for more complex, self-aware entertainment that challenged traditional narrative structures. It demonstrated that comedy could be a vehicle for serious psychological and social exploration without losing its entertainment value. Most importantly, Family Guy showed that taking creative risks, even when they result in cancellation, can ultimately lead to greater success than playing it safe. The show's death and resurrection became a template for how creative properties can find new life through changing audience behaviors and consumption patterns. So the next time you watch Family Guy, remember that you're not just watching a cartoon about a dysfunctional family. You're watching a sophisticated piece of media art that changed television forever, influenced how we communicate with each other, and continues to push boundaries in ways that most viewers never fully appreciate. The real genius of Family Guy isn't in any single joke or episode. It's in how it managed to hide all this complexity behind what appears to be simple, silly humor. That's the ultimate magic trick, and it's still working after all these years. Have you ever wondered what makes Family Guy the perfect show to fall asleep to? Tonight, we're diving deep into the wonderfully weird world of Quahog to uncover some fascinating facts that might just help you understand why millions of people drift off to this animated chaos every single night. But first, let me ask you something. What if I told you that the baby genius who plots world domination actually has one of the most tragic character arcs in television history? Or that there's a scientific reason why Peter Griffin's voice might be the ultimate sleep aid? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at your bedtime Family Guy marathon the same way again. Let's start with something that'll blow your mind. Stewie Griffin, that diabolical infant with the posh British accent, wasn't always the character we know today. In the original concept, he was supposed to be much darker and more sinister. The show's creator, Seth MacFarlane, initially envisioned him as a genuinely evil character whose plans would occasionally succeed. But here's the fascinating part that most fans don't realize. Stewie's entire personality is built on a foundation of insecurity and loneliness that makes him oddly relatable, especially during those late-night viewing sessions when you're feeling a bit isolated yourself. The genius baby's accent tells us everything we need to know about human psychology. In one of the show's most revealing moments, Stewie admits in therapy that his British accent is completely fake. He adopted it to sound smarter and more sophisticated than everyone around him. It's essentially vocal armor designed to protect his vulnerable core. This resonates with so many viewers because we all put on masks to hide our insecurities. When you're lying in bed at 3 in the morning, there's something comforting about a character who's also struggling with authenticity. But here's where it gets really interesting. The show deliberately keeps it ambiguous whether other characters can actually understand Stewie. Sometimes they respond to him. Sometimes they completely ignore his elaborate monologues about world domination. This creates a dreamlike quality that perfectly mirrors the state between waking and sleeping. Your brain doesn't have to work too hard to follow rigid logic because the show itself operates on dream logic. Speaking of dream logic, let's talk about the show's relationship with time and reality. Family Guy is famous for its cutaway gags that transport viewers to completely different scenarios mid-episode. One moment Peter is arguing with Lois about dinner. The next moment we're watching a historical flashback about Napoleon's bathroom habits. These rapid shifts in context actually mimic the way our minds work when we're falling asleep, jumping from thought to thought without linear connection. The show's approach to continuity is another sleep-inducing factor. Characters die and come back to life, major events get completely forgotten by the next episode, and the family somehow never ages despite running for over 2 decades. This lack of consequences creates a safe space for your mind. You don't need to worry about emotional investment or following complex storylines. It's mental comfort food. Now let's examine the voice acting, because this is where the science gets really interesting. Seth MacFarlane voices multiple main characters, including Peter, Brian, and Stewie. The consistency of hearing the same vocal patterns creates a subconscious sense of familiarity and safety. Peter's voice in particular has a rhythmic, almost hypnotic quality that many sleep specialists would recognize as naturally soothing. The slight nasal tone and steady pacing can actually help regulate breathing patterns. Brian Griffin represents something unique in the Family Guy universe. As the talking dog who serves as the show's voice of reason, he often delivers philosophical observations and cultural commentary. But here's what makes him perfect for sleep viewing. His conversations with Stewie frequently dive into existential topics without becoming too heavy or anxiety-provoking. They discuss the meaning of life, mortality, and purpose in ways that feel profound but never overwhelming. It's like having a gentle philosophical discussion as you drift off to sleep. The show's approach to controversial topics is surprisingly sophisticated when you analyze it from a sleep psychology perspective. While Family Guy is known for pushing boundaries, it does so in such an over-the-top way that it becomes almost cartoonish rather than genuinely disturbing. This allows viewers to process difficult subjects without the emotional intensity that would keep them awake. It's social commentary wrapped in enough absurdity to feel safe. Let's dive into the Griffin family dynamics, because they reveal something fascinating about comfort viewing. Despite all their dysfunction, the family always comes back together by the end of each episode. Peter might do something incredibly stupid. Lois might lose her temper. Meg might face another humiliation, but they remain a unit. This predictable structure provides emotional security. No matter how chaotic things get, you know everything will essentially reset by the next episode. The show's treatment of Meg Griffin deserves special attention. As the perpetually misunderstood teenager who faces constant rejection and ridicule, She represents the part of ourselves we're most insecure about. But the show's portrayal of her suffering is so exaggerated that it becomes therapeutic rather than depressing. It's like having your own adolescent anxieties reflected back to you in such an extreme way that they lose their power to hurt you. Chris Griffin, the dim-witted but kind-hearted son, provides another layer of comfort. His innocence and genuine sweetness create moments of unexpected warmth throughout the show. When everything else is cynical and sarcastic, Chris offers glimpses of pure, uncomplicated emotion. These moments work like pressure valves, releasing tension just when the cynicism might become overwhelming. The show's relationship with pop culture creates a unique viewing experience that's perfect for repeat watching. The references span decades, from obscure 70s television shows to current internet memes. This means different jokes land differently depending on your age, mood, and current knowledge base. You can watch the same episode multiple times and discover new layers, but the discovery process is gentle and rewarding rather than demanding. Family Guy's animation style contributes to its sleep-friendliness in subtle but important ways. The character designs are simple and rounded, avoiding sharp angles or jarring visual elements that might startle viewers. The color palette is warm and familiar, dominated by the cozy yellows and browns of the Griffin home. Even during action sequences or fantastical cutaways, the visual style remains consistent and non-threatening. The show's musical elements deserve recognition too. From Stewie and Brian's elaborate musical numbers to Peter's improvised songs, music is woven throughout the series in ways that create rhythm and flow. These musical interludes often serve as natural breaking points, giving your brain permission to zone out or drift away. The songs are catchy enough to be memorable, but rarely complex enough to demand active listening. One of the most brilliant aspects of Family Guy's sleep appeal is its relationship with repetition. The show has been running for so long that certain gags and character interactions have become ritualistic. Peter fighting the giant chicken, Stewie's elaborate revenge plots against Lois, Brian's pretentious literary aspirations. These recurring elements create a sense of familiarity that can be deeply comforting for regular viewers. The show's approach to violence is another key factor. While there's plenty of cartoon violence, it's always presented in such an unrealistic way that it never feels genuinely threatening. Characters get blown up, shot, crushed, and dismembered, only to appear completely fine in the next scene. This consequence-free violence allows viewers to experience excitement and tension without any lasting anxiety. Let's talk about the show's treatment of mortality, because this might be the most important element for sleep viewing. Death appears frequently in Family Guy, but it's always treated as either temporary or comedic rather than genuinely tragic. Characters die and return, discuss death casually, and face mortal peril without real consequences. For viewers dealing with their own mortality anxieties, especially late at night, this approach can be surprisingly therapeutic. The writing style of Family Guy creates a unique rhythm that mirrors natural sleep patterns. Episodes often start with high-energy scenarios that gradually wind down through various subplots and cutaways. By the time you reach the resolution, the pacing has naturally slowed, making it easier to transition into actual sleep. It's like the show is designed to help you power down. Family Guy's relationship with nostalgia is complex and comforting. The show constantly references and parodies elements from decades past, creating a sense of collective cultural memory. Whether it's a reference to an 80s movie, a 70s television show, or a 90s commercial, these callbacks create connections to simpler times. For many viewers, this nostalgic element provides emotional comfort that eases the transition to sleep. The show's approach to relationships and romance offers another layer of sleep-friendly content. Despite all the dysfunction and crude humor, there are genuine moments of love and connection between characters. Peter and Lois, despite their constant conflicts, clearly love each other. Stewie and Brian, despite their differences, have formed an everyday, unlikely but deep friendship. These relationship dynamics provide emotional warmth without demanding too much investment. Here's something most people don't realize about Family Guy's structure. The show operates on multiple levels of engagement. You can watch it as pure background noise, letting the familiar voices and music wash over you. You can engage with the surface-level humor and sight gags. Or You can dive deep into the cultural references and character development. This flexibility makes it perfect for different stages of falling asleep. The show's treatment of everyday situations is particularly sleep-friendly. Many episodes revolve around mundane domestic issues like household chores, neighbor disputes, or family dinners that somehow spiral into elaborate adventures. But no matter how wild things get, they always return to the familiar setting of the Griffin home. This creates a sense of adventure within safety, excitement within security. Family Guy's approach to current events and social issues provides another comfort layer. The show comments on politics, social trends, and cultural phenomena, but always through the lens of cartoon absurdity. This allows viewers to engage with real-world concerns without the anxiety that usually accompanies such topics. It's like having a pressure release valve for contemporary stress. The show's episodic nature means you never have to worry about missing crucial plot developments if you fall asleep mid-episode. While there are occasionally multi-part episodes or recurring storylines, the vast majority of episodes are self-contained. This removes the anxiety about keeping up with complex narratives and allows your mind to relax completely. As we wrap up this deep dive into why Family Guy has become the ultimate sleep companion for millions of viewers, remember that comfort viewing is a deeply personal experience. What works for one person might not work for another, but there's something undeniably special about a show that can make you laugh, think, and ultimately feel at peace, all within the span of 22 minutes. The genius of Family Guy as a sleep aid lies in its perfect balance of engagement and relaxation. It's stimulating enough to occupy your conscious mind and prevent anxious thoughts from taking over, but familiar and comforting enough to allow your subconscious to begin the journey towards sleep. Whether you're drawn to Stewie's elaborate schemes, Peter's childlike wonder, or Brian's philosophical musings, there's something in this animated chaos for everyone. So the next time you find yourself reaching for that remote at bedtime, remember that you're not just choosing mindless entertainment. You're selecting a carefully crafted comfort blanket that's helped millions of people transition from the stresses of the day into peaceful rest. Sweet dreams, and remember, in Quahog, everything always works out in the end. Ever wondered what happens when you dive deep into the chaotic world of Quahog at 3 in the morning? Tonight we're exploring the most bizarre, hilarious, and downright weird facts about Family Guy that'll keep your mind occupied while you drift off to sleep. From hidden Easter eggs to behind-the-scenes secrets that even longtime fans don't know. This collection of random Family Guy trivia is perfect for those late-night moments when you need something entertaining but not too stimulating. Picture this. You're lying in bed, scrolling through your phone, and suddenly you're wondering about the strangest details from America's most controversial animated family. Well, you're in luck, because we've gathered dozens of fascinating tidbits that reveal just how deep the rabbit hole goes in Seth MacFarlane's animated universe. Let's start with something that might surprise you about the show's origins. Family Guy actually premiered in 1999, making it older than The Sopranos, Lost, and even The Office. But here's the kicker. The show was canceled not once, but twice by Fox. The first cancellation happened in 2002 after 3 seasons, and then again in 2005 after being brought back for a 4th season. What saved it the second time? DVD sales and reruns on Adult Swim were so successful that Fox had no choice but to bring it back permanently. Speaking of cancellations, did you know that the famous episode where Stewie and Brian get locked in a bank vault was actually written as a potential series finale? The writers thought the show might not get renewed, so they created this bottle episode as a way to give fans closure while keeping production costs low. It ended up becoming one of the most beloved episodes in the entire series. Here's something that'll make you appreciate the voice acting even more. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 main characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Glenn Quagmire. But what's really impressive is that he can switch between all these voices seamlessly during recording sessions. The man is basically having conversations with himself for hours at a time. Imagine being in that recording booth and watching him argue with himself as Peter and Stewie. Now let's talk about some hidden details you've probably never noticed. In the opening credits, when the family is sitting on the couch, Stewie is always holding a different object. Sometimes it's a teddy bear, sometimes a ray gun, and occasionally it's something completely random, like a pineapple. The animators change this detail regularly, but it's so subtle that most viewers never pick up on it. The Griffin's address has actually been revealed multiple times throughout the series, but it keeps changing. Sometimes they live at 31 Spooner Street. Other times, it's 29 Spooner Street. This isn't continuity error. It's an intentional joke about how cartoon families can basically live anywhere the writers need them to live for the sake of a gag. Here's a weird one. Meg's full name is actually Megatron Griffin. This was revealed in one episode as a throwaway joke, but it's technically canon. Her parents named her after the Transformers villain, which honestly explains a lot about why she turned out the way she did. Imagine going through high school with that on your birth certificate. The chicken fights between Peter and Ernie the Giant Chicken aren't just random acts of cartoon violence. They're actually parodies of classic action movie fight scenes. Each fight references different films, from They Live to The Matrix. The writers spend enormous amounts of time choreographing these sequences to match specific cinematic moments frame by frame. Speaking of references, Family Guy holds the unofficial record for most pop culture references in a single animated series. The writers keep a database of potential references organized by category, decade, and obscurity level. They literally have spreadsheets dedicated to tracking which celebrities they've already made fun of and which ones are still fair game. Here's something about Brian that might change how you see him. His character was originally supposed to be much more of a background character, like a regular family pet who occasionally made sarcastic comments. But Seth MacFarlane enjoyed voicing him so much that Brian evolved into basically being Seth's mouthpiece for political and social commentary. This is why Brian often sounds like he's giving a college lecture. He essentially is. The Conway Twitty cutaways aren't just random musical interludes. They serve a specific purpose in television production. When episodes run short, the writers can insert these musical segments to pad out the runtime without having to animate new scenes or write additional dialogue. It's brilliant efficiency disguised as absurdist humor. Cleveland's house has been destroyed and rebuilt more times than any other location in the series. The writers keep track of this, and it's actually become a running competition among the staff to see who can come up with the most creative ways to demolish Cleveland's property. His house is basically the Kenny McCormick of buildings. Here's a detail about Quagmire that most people miss. His house number is 29. Peter's is 31, and Cleveland's was 33 before he moved away. But Joe's house number has never been consistently established, which has led to fan theories that he doesn't actually own his house and is just perpetually house-sitting for someone else. The famous "Whose line is it anyway" reference where Peter lists random words isn't actually random. Each word was carefully chosen to represent a different category of Family Guy humor. They're basically a roadmap of the show's comedic philosophy, hidden in plain sight. Stewie's accent has gradually changed over the years, from a thick British aristocrat voice to something more American. This wasn't accidental. Seth MacFarlane has said that maintaining the original accent was physically exhausting, so he's slowly been relaxing it as the series progressed. If you go back and watch early episodes, the difference is striking. The Pawtucket Brewery where Peter works is actually based on a real brewery in Rhode Island. The exterior shots are rotoscoped from actual footage of the Narragansett Brewery, though the interior is completely fictional. Local Rhode Islanders often spot familiar landmarks in the background of various episodes. Here's something about the show's animation. The characters' eyes are deliberately drawn to be slightly different sizes. Peter's left eye is always drawn slightly larger than his right, which gives him that perpetually confused expression. This asymmetry was added specifically to make him look more dopey and lovable. The reason death appears so frequently in early seasons is because the writers were originally planning to kill off a main character in every season finale, but Fox executives weren't comfortable with the concept. So death became a recurring character instead of a plot device, which is actually much funnier in hindsight. Lois's maiden name is Pewterschmidt, but her middle name has been given as both Marie and Nicole in different episodes. The writers claim this is intentional, suggesting that Lois has been lying about her middle name for years for reasons that will never be explained. The evil monkey in Chris's closet was originally supposed to be revealed as Chris's imaginary friend, but the writers decided it was funnier if he was completely real and just randomly living in their house. This decision led to one of the series' most beloved recurring characters. Here's something about the show's timeline. The Griffins have been celebrating the same holidays for over 20 years of real time, but they never age. However, the writers occasionally drop hints about the passage of time through background details like changing technology and evolving fashion trends in crowd scenes. The reason Peter's boss, Mr. Weed, died in such a bizarre way, choking on dinner rolls while watching Popeye, was because the writers wanted to establish that anyone could die at any time in the Family Guy universe, for completely ridiculous reasons. It set the precedent for the show's approach to mortality as comedy. Trisha Takanawa's reporting segments are all written by the same staff writer who used to work in local television news. All of her ridiculous news stories are based on real absurd stories that the writer covered during his journalism career, just exaggerated for comedic effect. The Drunken Clam Bar where Peter and his friends hang out was modeled after Cheers, but the writers deliberately made it seedier and more depressing to contrast with that show's warm, welcoming atmosphere. It's meant to represent the difference between idealized television friendships and actual dysfunctional male bonding. Here's a weird production detail. The show's writers keep a cutaway database with hundreds of unused cutaway gags organized by setup line. If they need a quick cutaway for an episode that's running short, they can search the database by keyword and find something appropriate. Some of these unused cutaways eventually become the basis for entire episodes. The reason Herbert, the elderly neighbor, is so creepy isn't just for shock value, is inassigned. His character is actually a commentary on how society often ignores obvious warning signs about predatory behavior. The writers intentionally make him so obviously suspicious that it becomes absurd that no one in the show takes him seriously. Stewie's football-shaped head wasn't originally intentional. Seth MacFarlane was just a poor artist when he created the character. But the distinctive shape became so iconic that when the animation quality improved, they kept the weird proportions on purpose. The show's musical numbers aren't just random, they're specifically written to parody different Broadway and Hollywood musical styles. Each song is crafted to sound like it could come from a specific era of musical theater, from 1930 seconds Hollywood musicals to modern Broadway productions. Here's something about the voice acting. When characters sing, their speaking voice actors don't always do the singing. Several characters have dedicated singing voices who are professional Broadway performers. This is why some characters sound noticeably different when they break into song. The chicken that fights Peter is named Ernie, and he has his own detailed backstory that's never fully explained in the show. According to the writers, Ernie has a family, a mortgage, and a completely normal life outside of his inexplicable rivalry with Peter. His motivations remain mysterious intentionally. Roadhouse is referenced more than any other single movie in Family Guy, appearing in over 30 different episodes in various forms. The writers have said this started as an inside joke because they couldn't believe how seriously the movie takes itself, but it evolved into genuine affection for the film's absurdity. The Conway Twitty segments were actually Seth MacFarlane's way of paying tribute to his grandfather, who was a huge country music fan. MacFarlane has said these moments are among his favorites in the entire series because they remind him of watching old variety shows with his grandfather. Meg's unpopularity isn't just a running gag. It's a deliberate commentary on how middle children often get overlooked in family dynamics. The writers have given her hidden depths that occasionally surface, suggesting she's actually the most emotionally intelligent member of the family despite being constantly ignored. The show's animation style deliberately mimics the look of 1980 seconds Saturday morning cartoons, complete with slightly off-model character designs and limited animation techniques. This was intentional, as MacFarlane wanted the show to feel nostalgic and slightly cheap, like the cartoons he grew up watching. Here's a detail about the opening theme. The lyrics were written to sound like a generic sitcom theme song, but they're actually describing a completely dysfunctional family situation. The cheerful melody masks the fact that the words are talking about how nothing in this family works properly. The reason Family Guy episodes often feel like collections of unrelated sketches is because that's exactly what they are. The writers start with a basic premise and then build around it with whatever random ideas they've been wanting to explore. This approach gives the show its unique, chaotic energy. So there you have it. Dozens of random Family Guy facts to occupy your mind as you drift off to sleep. From production secrets to hidden meanings, the world of Family Guy is far more complex and deliberate than it might appear on the surface. Whether you're a longtime fan or just discovering the show, these little details add extra layers to every rewatch. Sweet dreams. And remember, somewhere in Quahog, Peter Griffin is probably doing something spectacularly stupid, while Stewie plots world domination, and Brian writes terrible novels. The chaos never stops in the Griffin household, and honestly, we wouldn't want it any other way. Picture this. You're lying in bed, eyes heavy, ready to drift off to sleep, but your mind is still buzzing. Maybe you need something to help you unwind, something familiar and comforting that won't keep you too engaged. Well, tonight we're diving into the weird and wonderful world of Family Guy, with some absolutely wild facts that might just be the perfect bedtime companion. These aren't your typical trivia tidbits. We're talking about the kind of behind-the-scenes secrets and bizarre details that make this show the cultural phenomenon it became. Let me start with something that'll blow your mind right away. Did you know that Family Guy was actually canceled not once, but twice? Yeah, you heard that right. The show got the axe in 2002 after just 3 seasons, then came back in 2005, only to get canceled again in 2007. But here's where it gets interesting. The show's resurrection wasn't because of some executive's change of heart or a passionate fan campaign, though those things helped. It was actually because of DVD sales and reruns on Adult Swim that proved the show had a massive audience that networks had completely missed. The numbers were staggering. When Fox looked at the DVD sales figures, they realized they'd made a colossal mistake. The first season DVD became one of the best-selling TV show DVDs of all time, moving over 1 million copies in its first year. Adult Swim was paying Fox millions for the rerun rights, and the ratings were through the roof. It was like discovering you'd thrown away a winning lottery ticket, except you could still fish it out of the trash. But here's something even weirder about the show's cancellation drama. Seth MacFarlane, the creator, was actually somewhat relieved when it got canceled the first time. He was completely burned out from working insane hours, writing, voice acting, and overseeing every aspect of production. The guy was doing the voices for 3 main characters while running the entire show. When Fox pulled the plug, he thought his animation career might be over, but he also felt like he could finally breathe again. Speaking of Seth MacFarlane, here's a fact that'll keep you up at night thinking about alternate timelines. He was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 11 on September 11th, 2001. The flight that hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. He missed it because his travel agent gave him the wrong departure time, and he showed up to the gate 10 minutes after boarding had ended. He was hungover from partying the night before and almost didn't go to the airport at all. That single hangover and miscommunication might have changed television history forever. Now let's talk about something that'll make you appreciate the show's attention to detail. Every single Conway Twitty cutaway gag. You know those random moments where the show just cuts to the country singer performing for what feels like an eternity? Those weren't just random filler. They were actually Seth MacFarlane's way of trolling both the network and the audience. He knew these segments would drive people absolutely crazy, but he also knew they couldn't be cut because they were integral to reaching the episode's required runtime. The Conway Twitty thing became such a phenomenon that it spawned its own internal mythology at the show. Writers would pitch entire episodes around how they could work in a Conway Twitty segment. They'd sit in the writer's room timing these segments down to the second, calculating exactly how much actual story content they could replace with a dead country singer performing on stage. It was comedic genius disguised as laziness. Here's something that might surprise you about the show's voice acting. You know how Brian the dog sounds so sophisticated and intellectual? Well, Seth MacFarlane based that voice on his own natural speaking voice, but slightly more pretentious. He said in interviews that Brian represents the version of himself he'd be if he let his college education go to his head. The character became a way for MacFarlane to explore his own intellectual insecurities and liberal political views through a talking dog. But the really fascinating part is how the other voice actors developed their characters. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, originally auditioned for a completely different character on a different show MacFarlane was developing. When that project fell through, he remembered her voice and wrote Lois specifically for her. The character's Long Island accent and particular speech patterns are actually based on Borstein's own family members. Seth Green, who voices Chris, has admitted that he sometimes forgets he's supposed to be playing a teenager. He said the character's voice just comes naturally to him because it's basically his own voice from when he was going through puberty, which apparently lasted well into his 20s. The character's dim-witted, but lovable personality evolved because Green kept improvising lines that made the writers laugh during recording sessions. Now here's a production fact that'll make you realize how much work goes into seemingly simple animation. Each episode of Family Guy takes approximately 8 to 9 months to produce, from script to final broadcast. The writing process alone can take several months, with jokes being written, rewritten, and completely scrapped dozens of times. Then there's the voice recording, which happens in multiple sessions as scripts get revised. The animation process is where things get really wild. Every single frame has to be drawn by hand, even though the show uses computer software to assist with the process. A single 22-minute episode contains roughly 16,000 individual drawings. When you think about the fact that the show has produced over 400 episodes, that's literally millions of individual drawings that have brought these characters to life. But here's something that'll make you appreciate the show's cultural impact even more. Family Guy popularized the random cutaway gag format that's now become standard in animated comedy. Before Family Guy, most animated shows followed more traditional narrative structures. The show's willingness to completely abandon the main plot for a 30-second historical recreation or pop culture reference changed how comedy writers think about pacing and attention spans. The cutaway gags themselves have become a cultural phenomenon. There are entire YouTube channels dedicated to compiling them, and they've been referenced and parodied by countless other shows. But here's what's really interesting. The writers have admitted that sometimes they write the cutaway gag first, then build an entire episode around finding a way to naturally lead into it. Let's talk about something that might disturb your peaceful drift toward sleep: the show's relationship with censorship. Family Guy has been censored, banned, and protested more than almost any other primetime animated series. The Parents Television Council has named it the worst show on television multiple times. But here's the thing. All that controversy has only made the show more popular. The censorship battles have led to some genuinely creative solutions from the writers. When they can't say certain words or show certain images, they find increasingly elaborate ways to imply them. Some of the show's funniest moments have come from these creative workarounds. It's like watching a comedian perform with their hands tied behind their back, and somehow becoming even funnier because of the constraint. Here's a fact about the show's music that might surprise you. Seth MacFarlane is actually a classically trained vocalist who's released several albums of standards and jazz music. His musical background heavily influences the show's frequent musical numbers and elaborate song and dance sequences. Those aren't just random additions. They're MacFarlane showing off skills he developed long before he ever got into animation. The musical episodes of Family Guy often take months of additional preparation because they require completely different animation techniques, additional voice coaching for the actors, and original orchestral arrangements. The Blue Harvest Star Wars parody episodes alone required hiring an entire orchestra to record new versions of John Williams' iconic themes. Now, let's dive into something that'll make you think about celebrity culture differently. The show's celebrity cameos and parodies have occasionally led to real-world consequences for the celebrities involved. Some stars have embraced being mocked on the show, treating it as a badge of honor. Others have publicly complained or even threatened legal action. But here's what's really fascinating. Some celebrities have specifically requested to be made fun of on Family Guy because they know it'll keep them relevant in pop culture. The show has become such a cultural touchstone that being parodied on it is almost like being inducted into a Hall of Fame of American entertainment figures. The writers have developed an entire system for deciding which celebrities to target. They consider factors like current relevance, comedic potential, and likelihood of legal retaliation. There's literally a legal department that reviews every celebrity reference to make sure the show won't get sued into oblivion. Here's something about the show's international appeal that might keep your mind wandering as you fall asleep. Family Guy airs in over 100 countries, but many episodes have to be heavily edited or completely banned in certain regions due to cultural sensitivities or government censorship. The writers have become experts at predicting which jokes will translate across cultures and which ones will get the show pulled off the air in entire countries. The international dubbing process is particularly fascinating. Voice actors in different countries have to capture not just the literal translations of the jokes, but also the timing, delivery, and cultural references that make the humor work. Sometimes entire scenes have to be rewritten for different markets, with completely different jokes that serve the same narrative function. Speaking of narrative function, here's something about the show's storytelling that might surprise you. Despite its reputation for random, stream-of-consciousness humor, every episode follows extremely strict structural guidelines. The writers use a detailed formula for pacing, character development, and plot progression that's remained virtually unchanged since the show's early seasons. The formula is so precise that new writers go through extensive training to learn it. They practice writing sample episodes that hit specific comedic beats at exact timing intervals. It's like learning to write music in a very particular key and tempo. There's way more technical skill involved than most viewers realize. Here's a production detail that'll make you appreciate the voice actors even more. Most of the main voice cast records their lines together in the same studio, which is actually unusual for animated shows. Many animated series record each actor separately for scheduling convenience. But Family Guy's ensemble cast has developed such strong chemistry that they actually improvise and play off each other during recording sessions. These improvisation sessions have led to some of the show's most memorable moments. Jokes that weren't in the original script, character interactions that reveal new personality traits, and entire comedic sequences that grew out of the actors just goofing around in the studio. The writers have learned to leave space in their scripts for this kind of spontaneous creativity. The show's relationship with current events is another fascinating aspect of its production. Episodes are produced so far in advance that writers have to predict what will be culturally relevant 8 to 9 months in the future. They've developed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate which celebrities will still be famous, which political issues will still matter, and which pop culture references will still be funny by the time episodes air. Sometimes they get it spectacularly wrong, leading to episodes that reference celebrities who've completely disappeared from public consciousness, or make jokes about events that ended up being resolved in completely different ways. These temporal mismatches have become part of the show's charm, creating accidental time capsules of what people were thinking about during specific periods. Here's something about the show's merchandise empire that might occupy your thoughts as you drift off. Family Guy generates hundreds of millions of dollars in merchandise sales annually, from t-shirts and mugs to video games and Halloween costumes. The licensing department has to approve thousands of product designs, ensuring that everything maintains the show's comedic voice while being commercially viable. The most successful merchandise items are often the most random ones. Stewie's football head design became a best-selling plush toy. Brian's martini glass became a popular bar accessory. Peter's chicken fight with Ernie became an entire line of action figures. These products have introduced the show to audiences who might never watch it on television. As we wind down our journey through the bizarre world of Family Guy facts, here's one last thing to ponder as you close your eyes. The show has fundamentally changed how we consume comedy. It's trained an entire generation of viewers to expect rapid-fire jokes, constant pop culture references, and narrative structures that can pivot in completely unexpected directions at any moment. This influence extends far beyond television. You can see Family Guy's impact in internet memes, social media humor, and even in how people tell stories in everyday conversation. The show's cutaway gag structure has become a template for how we process and share information in the digital age. Those random tangents and seemingly unrelated references, they're everywhere now, from Twitter threads to TikTok videos. The show created a new language of comedy that's become so pervasive we barely notice it anymore. When someone starts telling a story, then suddenly pivots to a completely unrelated memory that somehow connects back to the original point, they're unconsciously using a Family Guy narrative structure. When someone makes a reference to an obscure piece of pop culture from decades ago to explain something happening today, they're speaking fluent Family Guy. So there you have it. As you drift off to sleep tonight, you can rest easy knowing that somewhere in the world, animators are drawing thousands of individual frames to bring new episodes to life. Voice actors are improvising lines that will make millions of people laugh, and writers are crafting jokes that will still be quoted years from now. The strange, wonderful, chaotic world of Family Guy continues to evolve, one random cutaway gag at a time. Sweet dreams. And remember, if you find yourself having weird dreams about talking dogs, evil babies, or inexplicably long Conway Twitty performances, you'll know exactly where those images came from. The show that changed comedy forever has probably infiltrated your subconscious too, joining the ranks of viewers who've been shaped by its unique brand of organized chaos. Picture this. You're settling in for a cozy night, getting ready to drift off into dreamland, but instead of counting sheep, how about we count some truly wild facts about one of television's most unpredictable animated families? Tonight, we're diving deep into the bizarre, hilarious, and surprisingly intricate world of Family Guy, and trust me, by the end of this journey, you'll have enough random trivia rattling around in your brain to either help you fall asleep or keep you up all night wondering how Seth MacFarlane's mind works. Let's start with something that might surprise you about the show's origins. Family Guy almost never existed in the form we know today. Back in the late 90s, Seth MacFarlane was working at Hanna-Barbera, the legendary animation studio behind classics like The Flintstones and The Jetsons. He created a short film called The Life of Larry for his thesis project at the Rhode Island School of Design, which featured many of the characters who would eventually become the Griffin family. The short was so impressive that it caught the attention of Fox executives, but here's where it gets interesting. MacFarlane was only 24 years old when he pitched the show, making him one of the youngest creators in television history to get a primetime animated series greenlit. The original concept was quite different from what we see today. Peter Griffin was initially going to be much more of a traditional sitcom dad. Think more like Homer Simpson, but without the yellow skin. The character's personality evolved significantly during the development process, becoming the lovably obnoxious and often controversial figure we know now. MacFarlane has mentioned in interviews that he drew inspiration from his own father's mannerisms and speech patterns, particularly the distinctive Rhode Island accent that Peter sports throughout the series. Here's a fact that might make you appreciate the show's complexity a bit more surface. The average Family Guy episode contains over 300 individual drawings. Each 22-minute episode requires thousands of hours of work from dozens of artists, animators, and voice actors. The animation process alone takes approximately 8 months from initial script to final product, which explains why the show's production schedule is so carefully planned out years in advance. Speaking of voice acting, Seth MacFarlane performs the voices of 4 main characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Glenn Quagmire. But here's something that might blow your mind. He records all of their dialogue separately, often having conversations with himself that last for hours. MacFarlane has described the experience as somewhat surreal, especially when he's voicing emotional scenes between characters like Brian and Stewie, who have some of the most complex relationships on the show. The character of Stewie Griffin deserves special attention because his development represents one of the most dramatic character evolution arcs in animated television history. Originally conceived as a straightforward villain baby bent on world domination and matricide, Stewie gradually transformed into a more nuanced character, exploring themes of sexuality, intelligence, and family dynamics. The shift was so gradual that many viewers didn't notice it happening over the course of several seasons. MacFarlane has stated that this evolution was intentional, reflecting his own growth as a writer and his desire to explore more sophisticated storytelling within the animated comedy format. One of the most fascinating aspects of Family Guy's production involves their approach to cutaway gags, those random tangential moments that have become the show's signature. The writers maintain what they call a gag bank, which is essentially a massive database of potential cutaway ideas that they can draw from when constructing episodes. Some of these gags were written years before they actually appeared on screen, waiting for the right episode and context to make them work. The process of selecting which gags make it into episodes involves multiple rounds of testing and refinement, with the writers constantly evaluating whether a particular joke will land with audiences or fall flat. The show's relationship with controversy has been both a blessing and a curse throughout its run. Family Guy has been canceled twice by Fox, first in 2002 after 3 seasons, and then brought back in 2005 due to strong DVD sales and reruns on Adult Swim. The second cancellation never actually happened, but the show came close several times due to various controversies and ratings fluctuations. What's interesting is that many of the episodes that generated the most controversy also ended up being some of the most popular, suggesting that the show's willingness to push boundaries is intrinsically linked to its success. The voice acting ensemble deserves recognition for their incredible consistency and chemistry. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, actually auditioned for the role while she was performing in the sketch comedy group MAD-TV. Her distinctive voice for Lois was inspired by her own grandmother, and she's mentioned that she sometimes forgets she's not using her natural speaking voice when recording Lois scenes. Mila Kunis, who voices Meg, was only 14 years old when she started on the show, making her one of the youngest voice actors to land a major role in prime-time animation. The show's musical elements often go unnoticed, but they represent a significant portion of the production effort. Family Guy features more original music than most animated series, with MacFarlane himself composing many of the songs and musical numbers. His background in musical theater strongly influences these segments, and many episodes feature elaborate musical sequences that require additional voice actors, musicians, and extended animation sequences. The episode Road to the Multiverse alone featured over 40 different animation styles and required nearly double the typical production time. Here's something that might surprise fans of the show's seemingly random humor. Family Guy episodes are actually meticulously structured according to classical comedy writing principles. Each episode follows a 3-act structure with carefully planned pacing and timing. The cutaway gags aren't randomly inserted. They're strategically placed to provide relief from main plot tension or to enhance particular jokes. The writers spend considerable time in the editing process, adjusting the timing of these elements to maximize comedic impact. The show's impact on popular culture extends far beyond television. Family Guy has spawned countless internet memes, influenced other animated series, and even affected the way people communicate online. Phrases like, "Oh my God, who the hell cares?" and "What the deuce?" have entered common usage, and the show's irreverent style has influenced everything from advertising to political commentary. The series has also been credited with helping to revive interest in animated comedy among adult audiences, paving the way for shows like Rick and Morty and BoJack Horseman. One of the most technically impressive aspects of Family Guy involves their approach to celebrity impressions and guest voices. The show has featured hundreds of celebrity guest stars over the years, but what's remarkable is how they integrate these appearances into the show's established comic rhythm. Many celebrities have mentioned that recording for Family Guy requires a different approach than traditional voice acting because the timing and delivery style is so specific to the show's aesthetic. The international versions of Family Guy present fascinating variations on the original concept. In different countries, certain cultural references are modified or replaced entirely to make sense to local audiences. The German version, for example, includes completely different cutaway gags that reference German culture and history. These adaptations require not just translation but complete rewriting of significant portions of episodes, essentially creating parallel versions of the same show. Behind the scenes, the Family Guy writing room operates more like a comedy club than a traditional television writing environment. Writers regularly perform their ideas for each other, and the collaborative process involves a lot of improvisation and spontaneous joke development. MacFarlane has described the experience as one of the most creatively fulfilling aspects of producing the show, and many writers who have worked on Family Guy have gone on to create their own successful comedy series. The show's approach to social commentary often flies under the radar because it's wrapped in such outrageous humor. Many episodes tackle serious subjects like politics, religion, and social justice, but they do so through such an absurdist lens that the commentary becomes almost subliminal. This technique allows the show to address controversial topics while maintaining its primarily comedic focus, though it also means that viewers can interpret the show's messages in wildly different ways. Family Guy's influence on animation technology shouldn't be overlooked either. The show was among the first animated series to extensively use digital animation techniques, and their production pipeline has been studied and emulated by animation studios worldwide. The efficiency of their animation process allows them to produce episodes more quickly than many competing shows, which is part of why they've been able to maintain such a consistent release schedule for so many years. The merchandising empire surrounding Family Guy represents another fascinating aspect of the show's cultural impact. From action figures to clothing lines to video games, the show has spawned a massive array of consumer products. What's interesting is how these products often feature jokes and dusgly references that only hardcore fans would understand, creating multiple tiers of engagement with the show's content. The show's relationship with censorship provides insight into how television content standards have evolved over the past 2 decades. Early episodes of Family Guy pushed boundaries that were considered quite shocking at the time, but many of those same jokes would barely register as controversial today. The series has served as a kind of barometer for changing social attitudes about humor, language, and acceptable content on television. Looking at Family Guy's longevity, it's remarkable that a show built around such seemingly random humor has maintained relevance for over 2 decades. Part of this success stems from the flexibility of the format, in the end, because the show isn't tied to realistic character development or consistent continuity. It can adapt to changing cultural contexts much more easily than traditional sitcoms. Characters can be completely different from episode to episode without breaking the show's internal logic. The voice recording process for Family Guy involves some unique challenges that most animated shows don't face. Because so many characters are voiced by the same actors, recording sessions often require complex scheduling to allow for quick character switches. MacFarlane, in particular, has developed techniques for rapidly shifting between his different character voices, sometimes switching between Peter and Brian mid-sentence during recording sessions. Family Guy's impact on comedy writing extends beyond animation into live-action television and film. Many comedy writers cite the show's fearless approach to offensive humor and its willingness to commit fully to absurd premises as influential in their own work. The show's success proved that audiences were hungry for comedy that didn't follow traditional rules about likability or moral messaging. The technical aspects of producing Family Guy's signature visual style involve more complexity than might be immediately apparent. The seemingly simple character designs actually require precise consistency across hundreds of artists working on each episode. The show maintains detailed style guides that specify everything from the exact curve of Peter's chin to the precise shade of Brian's fur, ensuring visual continuity across different animation teams and production facilities. As we wind down this journey through the wonderfully weird world of Family Guy, it's worth noting that the show continues to evolve and surprise audiences after more than 20 years on the air. Whether you love it or hate it, there's no denying that Family Guy has carved out a unique place in television history, pushing boundaries and challenging expectations in ways that few shows ever attempt. So, there you have it, a deep dive into the bizarre, brilliant, and sometimes bewildering universe of Family Guy. From its humble beginnings as a college thesis project to its status as one of the longest-running animated series in television history, the show represents a fascinating case study in how unconventional creativity can find mainstream success. Sweet dreams. And remember, in the world of Family Guy, literally anything can happen, and usually does. Did you know that Peter Griffin once spent over 20 minutes trying to remember if he locked his car, only to realize he doesn't actually own a car? Or that there's an episode where he becomes convinced his shadow is following him around? Welcome to the world of Family Guy, where the most bizarre situations somehow become comedy gold. I'm about to share some of the most mind-bending, sleep-inducing facts about this animated chaos that might just surprise you. Let me start with something that'll blow your mind. Did you know that Peter Griffin has died more times than any other main character on Family Guy? We're talking about legitimate deaths here, not just close calls or fake-outs. Throughout the series, Peter's been killed by everything from falling pianos to alien invasions. Yet somehow, he always manages to come back in the next scene, like nothing happened. The writers have never officially explained this phenomenon, leading to fan theories that range from Peter being immortal to the entire show taking place in some sort of cartoon purgatory. Here's another weird one that might help you drift off to sleep. Peter's weight has been officially listed as anywhere between 270 pounds to over 400 pounds, depending on which episode guide you're reading. But here's the kicker. In one episode, they actually show Peter stepping on a scale that reads -5 pounds. The joke was that he was so full of hot air that he defied the laws of physics. This kind of absurd humor is exactly what makes Family Guy so uniquely ridiculous. Speaking of Peter's physical characteristics, his age is another mystery that changes depending on who's writing the episode. He's been anywhere from 39 to 45 years old throughout the series. But in one memorable episode, they reveal that Peter doesn't actually know his own birthday. He's been celebrating it on the wrong day for years because he misread his birth certificate. When Lois finally corrects him, Peter insists on having a do-over birthday party, complete with all the presents he should have received on his actual birthday for the past decade. Now, here's something that might surprise you about the show's production. The famous chicken fights between Peter and Ernie the giant chicken weren't originally supposed to be recurring segments. The first fight scene was meant to be a one-off joke, but it tested so well with audiences that the writers decided to bring it back. These elaborate fight sequences, which can last several minutes and involve massive property damage across multiple city blocks, have become some of the most expensive animated sequences to produce on television. Each chicken fight costs more to animate than entire episodes of some other shows. Let me tell you about Peter's job situation, which is honestly more confusing than quantum physics. Throughout the series, he's worked at a toy factory, a brewery, his own fishing boat business, and even briefly as a bodyguard for a pop star. But here's the thing that'll keep you puzzling as you fall asleep. Sometimes within the same season, the show will contradict itself about where Peter works. In one episode, he'll be complaining about his boss at the brewery, and in the very next episode, he's somehow back at the toy factory with no explanation whatsoever. The Griffin family house itself is another source of endless continuity errors that hardcore fans love to debate. The layout of the house changes constantly throughout the series. Sometimes there are 4 bedrooms upstairs, sometimes 3. The basement has appeared on both the left and right sides of the house in different episodes. Most bizarrely, there was one episode where they showed a second staircase that had never existed before and has never been seen since. It's like the house exists in its own dimension, where architecture is more of a suggestion than a rule. Here's a fact that might make you chuckle as you're trying to fall asleep. Peter Griffin holds the record for the most words spoken per minute in any animated television series. During his fastest rapid-fire dialogue sequence, he spoke over 400 words in 60 seconds. The voice actor, Seth MacFarlane, had to practice that particular monologue for weeks to get it right. And even then, they had to record it in multiple takes and edit them together digitally. The show's relationship with censorship has always been interesting. But did you know that there are entire episodes that have been completely banned from certain countries? Not just edited or censored, but completely prohibited from airing. These episodes aren't necessarily the ones you'd expect either. Sometimes it's because of obscure cultural references that were considered offensive, or because of background details that viewers in certain regions found problematic. There's apparently a whole vault of Family Guy content that most of the world will never see. Peter's relationship with food deserves its own documentary series. Throughout the show, he's eaten everything from expired milk that was older than Meg to a sandwich so large it required a forklift to deliver. But the most impressive feat was when he ate an entire Thanksgiving dinner, including the table it was served on, in under 3 minutes. This wasn't even treated as particularly unusual by his family, who just went ahead and ordered pizza instead. The voice acting for Peter involves more physical comedy than you might expect. Seth MacFarlane actually acts out many of Peter's movements while recording his lines, which is why the character's gestures often seem so natural and expressive. During particularly energetic scenes, MacFarlane has been known to sweat through multiple shirts in a single recording session. He's also injured himself several times while getting too into character, including once throwing out his back during a particularly enthusiastic laugh sequence. Here's something that might surprise you about the show's writing process. Many of Peter's most memorable one-liners were actually improvised during recording sessions. The writers would provide the basic structure of a scene, but they'd leave room for MacFarlane to add his own comedic touches. Some of these improvised moments became so popular with fans that they were later incorporated into the show's official mythology. The Griffin family car has been destroyed and mysteriously repaired more times than any other vehicle in television history. We're talking about complete destruction here. Blown up, crushed by giant robots, eaten by sea monsters, you name it. Yet somehow, it always appears good as new in the next scene. The car itself is supposed to be a mid-'80s sedan, but its exact make and model changes from episode to episode. Sometimes it's a Honda, sometimes it's a Ford, and occasionally it's a completely fictional brand that doesn't exist in real life. Peter's medical history reads like something out of a medical textbook written by someone who's never been to medical school. He's survived diseases that don't exist, undergone surgeries that are physically impossible, and been treated by doctors who clearly got their degrees from the back of a cereal box. In one episode, he's diagnosed with a condition where his bones are apparently made of rubber, which somehow makes him both incredibly flexible and completely indestructible. The show's approach to time and aging is fascinatingly inconsistent. While the Simpson family has remained the same age for decades, the Griffins seem to exist in a temporal bubble where sometimes years pass and sometimes they don't. Stewie has been a baby for over 20 years of real time. But there have been episodes where characters reference events from their past that would require them to have aged significantly. Here's a production detail that might interest you as you're winding down for the night. The animators have developed an entire catalog of Peter's facial expressions that numbers in the thousands. Each expression is carefully categorized by emotion, intensity, and context. There's apparently an expression called Peter confused by technology that gets used at least once per episode, and another one called Peter realizing he's made a terrible mistake. That's practically the show's trademark look. The Griffin family's financial situation is another source of endless mystery. Despite Peter's various job situations and questionable work ethic, the family somehow maintains a middle-class lifestyle in a decent neighborhood. They've been shown to be both desperately broke and surprisingly wealthy, sometimes within the same episode. Peter once claimed to have no money for groceries, while simultaneously planning an expensive vacation to Europe. Peter's relationship with technology provides some of the show's most relatable comedy, especially for anyone who's ever struggled with modern gadgets. He's been defeated by everything from automatic doors to digital clocks. There was one memorable episode where he spent the entire runtime trying to figure out how to change the channel on a television remote, only to discover at the end that the TV wasn't even plugged in. The show's animation style has evolved significantly over the years, but Peter's character design has remained remarkably consistent. The animators have stated that his round shape and simple features make him one of the easier characters to draw, which is ironic considering how complex his personality has become over the years. His iconic green pants and white shirt combination was originally chosen because those colors were easy to reproduce consistently in animation. Here's something that might make you smile as you're drifting off. Peter Griffin has inadvertently solved more crimes than most actual detectives on television, not through any kind of investigative skill, mind you, but through sheer dumb luck and his tendency to stumble into situations where criminals just happen to confess everything to him. He's uncovered everything from art theft rings to international espionage operations, usually while just trying to buy a sandwich or find a bathroom. The character's impact on popular culture extends far beyond the show itself. Peter's laugh has been sampled in music tracks. His catchphrases have entered everyday vocabulary, and his image has appeared on everything from t-shirts to coffee mugs. There's even been academic papers written about his role as a representation of American masculinity in the 21st century, which is probably something Peter himself would find hilariously pretentious. Peter's driving skills, or complete lack thereof, deserve special mention. He's been responsible for more animated car accidents than any other cartoon character in history. The Department of Motor Vehicles in the show's universe has apparently given up on revoking his license, instead just accepting that Peter Griffin behind the wheel is simply a force of nature that must be endured. The show's writers have admitted that they sometimes write episodes specifically around Peter's most ridiculous character traits. There are entire plot lines that exist solely because someone in the writer's room wondered what would happen if Peter tried to do something completely ordinary, like go grocery shopping or attend a parent-teacher conference, and inevitably turned it into a disaster of epic proportions. As we wrap up this collection of Family Guy facts, here's one final detail that perfectly captures the show's absurdist spirit. In the show's internal logic, Peter Griffin is simultaneously the most incompetent person alive and somehow capable of surviving situations that would destroy normal human beings. He's a character who can't figure out how to use a can opener, but can somehow survive being hit by a train. He's confused by basic mathematics, but has accidentally invented several revolutionary technologies while trying to fix his toaster. These contradictions aren't bugs in the show's writing, they're features. Family Guy exists in a universe where logic is optional and consistency is overrated. Peter Griffin embodies this philosophy perfectly, being both completely relatable and utterly impossible at the same time. Whether that helps you fall asleep or keeps you awake wondering about the nature of animated reality is entirely up to you. Sweet dreams. And remember, in the world of Family Guy, even the most ridiculous facts somehow make perfect sense, which might be the most ridiculous fact of all. Hey there, night owls and Family Guy fanatics. If you're scrolling through YouTube at 3 in the morning looking for something to help you drift off to dreamland, you've stumbled upon the perfect video. Tonight we're diving deep into the bizarre, hilarious, and sometimes completely unhinged world of Family Guy with some truly wild facts that'll either lull you to sleep or keep you wide awake wondering how Seth MacFarlane's mind actually works. So grab your favorite blanket, dim those lights, and let's explore the wonderfully weird universe of Quahog, Rhode Island. Trust me, by the end of this journey through Family Guy's most fascinating secrets, you'll either be peacefully snoozing or have a whole new appreciation for just how crazy this show really gets. Let's start with something that might blow your mind. Did you know that Family Guy was actually canceled not once, but twice? Yeah, you heard that right. The show first got the axe in 2002 after just 3 seasons, and Fox thought they were done with the Griffin family forever. But here's where it gets interesting. The show found new life through DVD sales and reruns on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block. The ratings were so incredible that Fox literally had to eat humble pie and bring the show back in 2005. Then, believe it or not, they canceled it again in 2007, only to reverse that decision just months later. Talk about a roller coaster relationship between a network and a show. Speaking of relationships, let's talk about the voice behind our favorite talking baby, Stewie Griffin. Seth MacFarlane doesn't just voice Stewie, he also voices Brian, Peter, Glenn Quagmire, and several other characters. But here's the kicker. MacFarlane based Stewie's voice on the accent of English actor Rex Harrison, who you might know from the classic musical My Fair Lady. Yeah, that sophisticated, slightly pompous British accent that makes Stewie sound like an evil mastermind. It's straight from a Broadway legend. MacFarlane has said in interviews that he wanted Stewie to sound like an old-school English gentleman, which makes it even funnier when this supposedly refined character is plotting world domination from his crib. Now, if you think the show pushes boundaries on television, you should hear about some of the stuff that never made it to air. The writers and animators have created countless scenes, jokes, and entire storylines that were deemed too controversial even for Family Guy's standards. And considering what does make it onto television, that's really saying something. There's apparently an entire vault of unused content that could probably fill several seasons worth of episodes. Some of these rejected bits have made their way onto DVD releases as deleted scenes, but many remain locked away forever, too wild even for the show known for having no limits. Here's something that might surprise you about the show's production process. Unlike many animated series that plan out entire seasons in advance, Family Guy often operates more like a live-action sitcom. The writers frequently come up with ideas on the spot, and episodes are sometimes completely rewritten just weeks before they're supposed to air. This spontaneous approach explains why the show can feel so fresh and unpredictable, but it also leads to some pretty intense crunch times for the animation team. Imagine trying to animate complex scenes with just days to spare before broadcast. Let's dive into some character secrets that most fans never realize. Brian the dog, everyone's favorite intellectual canine, was originally supposed to be just a regular pet. In the original concept, Brian was going to be a typical dog who couldn't talk and would just bark and fetch like any normal household pet. Seth MacFarlane decided to make him a talking character at the last minute, and thank goodness he did, because Brian's philosophical conversations and sarcastic wit have become some of the show's most memorable moments. It's wild to think that one of the most complex characters almost didn't have a voice at all. The show's animation style has some fascinating secrets too. Those seemingly simple character designs actually take an enormous amount of work to create. Each character has hundreds of different facial expressions and poses that animators can mix and match. Stewie alone has over 300 different mouth positions just for speaking different sounds. The animators have to keep track of all these variations to maintain consistency across episodes. It's like having a massive digital puppet show where every single movement has to be carefully orchestrated. Here's a fact that might make you appreciate the show's music even more. Seth MacFarlane isn't just the creator, writer, and voice actor for multiple characters. He's also a legitimate recording artist who's released several albums of traditional pop standards. His musical background heavily influences the show, which is why you'll notice that Family Guy has more musical numbers than most animated comedies. Those elaborate song and dance sequences aren't just thrown in for laughs. They're crafted by someone who genuinely understands musical theater and classic American songbook traditions. The show's cultural impact goes way beyond just entertainment. Family Guy has actually influenced real-world events and conversations. Politicians have referenced the show in speeches. Academics have written scholarly papers about its social commentary, and it's been credited with introducing younger audiences to cultural references they might never have encountered otherwise. Think about how many classic movies, TV shows, songs, and historical events you first learned about through a Family Guy cutaway gag. The show serves as this weird cultural bridge between different generations of entertainment. Now let's talk about some of the show's most controversial episodes and why they're so memorable. The writers have never shied away from tackling sensitive subjects, and sometimes their approach has sparked genuine debates about comedy, censorship, and social responsibility. Some episodes have been pulled from rotation, others have been edited for different markets, and a few have become legendary among fans, specifically because they push things too far. This willingness to court controversy has kept Family Guy relevant for over 2 decades, even as television landscape has changed dramatically around it. The voice acting process for Family Guy is unlike anything you'd expect. Seth MacFarlane often records multiple characters in the same session, essentially having conversations with himself. He'll record Peter's lines, then immediately switch to Brian's voice to respond, then jump to Stewie for the next exchange. Watching him work in the recording booth is apparently like witnessing someone with multiple personality disorder having a very organized conversation with themselves. Other voice actors have said it's both impressive and slightly unsettling to watch. Here's something that connects to the show's longevity. Family Guy has aired over 400 episodes, making it one of the longest-running animated series in television history. To put that in perspective, if you watched every single episode back-to-back, you'd be sitting there for more than 150 hours straight. That's almost a full week of continuous Family Guy content. The show has literally created enough material to entertain someone for an entire week without sleeping, eating, or taking a single break. The show's international versions reveal some fascinating cultural differences. Family Guy is broadcast in dozens of countries, and each version has to navigate different censorship standards and cultural sensitivities. In some countries, entire jokes are replaced with completely different content. In others, characters' names are changed, and certain running gags are modified to make sense to local audiences. There are versions of Family Guy where the cultural references are so different that they're essentially completely different shows with the same characters. Let's explore some behind-the-scenes drama that most fans never hear about. Like any long-running show, Family Guy has had its share of creative disagreements, contract disputes, and personality conflicts. Seth MacFarlane has been very public about his occasional frustrations with the show, even stepping back from day-to-day involvement for several seasons. There have been disputes over storylines, character development, and the general direction of the show. Some former writers and voice actors have shared stories about heated arguments in writers' rooms and recording sessions that had to be stopped because of creative differences. The show's merchandising empire is absolutely massive, but some of the most interesting products never made it to market. There have been proposed Family Guy video games, theme park attractions, and even a planned Broadway musical that would have featured the Griffin family in live-action musical theater. The legal and logistical challenges of adapting animated characters for different mediums have killed dozens of potential projects over the years. Imagine walking through a Family Guy theme park, or watching actors in Peter and Lois costumes singing on Broadway. Here's a production secret that reveals how much work goes into each episode. A single 22-minute episode of Family Guy requires approximately 8 months to complete from initial concept to final broadcast. The process involves dozens of writers, voice actors, animators, sound engineers, and editors. Every single frame is reviewed multiple times. Every joke is analyzed and often rewritten. And every visual gag is carefully planned and executed. What looks like simple animation on screen represents thousands of hours of collaborative creative work. The show's relationship with censorship has created some legendary stories. There are episodes that exist in multiple versions, with different levels of content depending on when and where they're broadcast. The uncensored DVD versions of some episodes contain jokes and scenes that have never been seen on television. Meanwhile, daytime reruns are edited so heavily that some episodes are barely recognizable. The writers have learned to create content in layers, knowing that different versions will need different levels of editing for different audiences. Family Guy's influence on internet culture deserves its own discussion. The show has generated countless memes, viral videos, and online discussions. Certain episodes have become legendary specifically because of how they're shared and referenced online. The show's cutaway gag format translates perfectly to social media, where short, punchy jokes can be easily shared and remixed. Some Family Guy moments have become more famous as internet memes than they ever were as television content. The voice acting talent that has appeared on Family Guy reads like a who's who of entertainment. Celebrities often jump at the chance to appear on the show, sometimes playing themselves, sometimes voicing original characters. The guest star list includes everyone from major Hollywood actors to political figures to professional athletes. Some celebrities have become recurring characters, while others have appeared just once but created memorable moments that fans still talk about years later. Here's something that might change how you watch the show. Many of the seemingly random cutaway gags are actually carefully constructed references to specific movies, TV shows, or historical events. The writers spend considerable time researching these references to make sure they're accurate, even when they're being completely absurd. There are entire databases that catalog every cultural reference in every episode, and the depth of knowledge required to understand all the jokes is honestly staggering. The show's animation has evolved significantly over its run, but not always in ways you might expect. While the overall character designs have remained consistent, the background art, lighting effects, and scene composition have become much more sophisticated. Early episodes look almost primitive compared to recent ones, but the evolution has been so gradual that most viewers don't notice. Comparing the pilot episode to current episodes is like looking at completely different shows that happen to use the same characters. Family Guy's impact on other animated shows cannot be overstated. The success of Family Guy paved the way for countless other adult animated comedies, from American Dad to Rick and Morty to BoJack Horseman. The show proved that animated comedies could tackle adult themes and attract mature audiences, opening up an entire genre that barely existed before. Many current animators and writers cite Family Guy as a direct influence on their work and career choices. The show's approach to storytelling often breaks conventional narrative rules in fascinating ways. Episodes frequently abandon their main plots entirely for extended tangents. Characters regularly break the fourth wall to address the audience directly, and the show often parodies its own format and conventions. This meta approach to comedy requires a level of self-awareness that's rare in television, and it's part of what keeps longtime fans engaged, even after hundreds of episodes. As we wind down this journey through Family Guy's hidden world, it's worth reflecting on how a cartoon about a dysfunctional family in Rhode Island became such a cultural phenomenon. The show succeeds because it taps into something fundamentally human about finding humor in chaos, about laughing at things that probably shouldn't be funny, and about the strange comfort of familiar characters behaving in completely unpredictable ways. Whether you're drifting off to sleep or wide awake thinking about animated comedy theory, Family Guy continues to surprise, offend, entertain, and occasionally enlighten its audience after more than 20 years on the air. The show's ability to constantly reinvent itself while maintaining its core identity is perhaps the most impressive fact of all. Sweet dreams, and remember, somewhere in Quahog, the Griffin family is probably getting into trouble that's even weirder than anything we've discussed tonight. The chaos never really stops. And somehow, that's exactly what makes it so perfect for helping restless minds finally find peace. Until next time, sleep tight and don't let the giant chicken nightmares bite. Picture this. You're lying in bed, scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m, and suddenly, you remember that time Peter Griffin literally married a cardboard cutout of himself. Welcome to the weird, wild world of Family Guy, where the most random facts are often the most fascinating ones. Tonight, we're diving deep into the strangest corners of Quahog, with facts so bizarre they'll either help you drift off to sleep or keep you awake, wondering how the writers even came up with this stuff. Let me start with something that'll blow your mind. Did you know that the original concept for Family Guy was completely different from what we got? Seth MacFarlane initially pitched the show as a much darker comedy about a dysfunctional family dealing with serious issues. The network executives were so confused by the pilot that they almost didn't pick it up. Thank goodness they did, because otherwise, we wouldn't have gems like the time Brian became a used car salesman and accidentally sold Death his own car. Speaking of Brian, here's a fact that might surprise you. The character was originally supposed to be much more of a background character, basically just the family pet who occasionally made sarcastic comments. But Seth MacFarlane loved voicing him so much that Brian gradually became one of the main characters. This explains why Brian's personality seems to evolve so dramatically throughout the early seasons. He went from being a simple talking dog to a pretentious intellectual with daddy issues and a drinking problem. Now let's talk about something truly random. The chicken fight scenes between Peter and Ernie the giant chicken weren't supposed to become a recurring gag. The first fight scene in the episode Da Boom was meant to be a one-off joke, but the animators had so much fun creating the elaborate fight sequence that they kept bringing it back. Each subsequent chicken fight got more elaborate and destructive, eventually involving helicopters, submarines, and entire city blocks being demolished. The longest chicken fight lasted nearly 4 minutes of screen time, which is practically an eternity in television comedy. Here's something that'll make you appreciate the show's attention to detail. Every time you see the Griffin house, the layout is actually consistent throughout the series. The creators took the time to map out every room, every hallway, every closet in the house, so that when characters move around, it makes spatial sense. This is incredibly rare in animated comedies, where houses often have impossible layouts that change depending on what the joke requires. The Griffin house blueprints are actually available online, and fans have used them to build accurate replicas in video games and even real life. Moving on to character quirks. Did you know that Meg's unpopularity at school was originally supposed to be temporary? The writers planned to have her eventually find her place and become more confident, but the running gag of everyone treating Meg terribly became so popular with audiences that they decided to make it a permanent part of her character. Mila Kunis, who voices Meg, has said in interviews that she sometimes feels bad about all the abuse her character receives, but she understands that it's become essential to the show's dynamic. Let's dive into some voice acting trivia that's perfect for late-night pondering. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 main characters on the show, but he almost didn't voice Stewie at all. The original plan was to have Stewie voiced by a child actor, but MacFarlane was worried about the controversial things Stewie would say and didn't want to put a real child in that position. So he developed Stewie's distinctive British accent as a way to make the character's adult thoughts coming from a baby's mouth even more surreal and funny. Chris Griffin's voice is another interesting story. Seth Green, who voices Chris, has to actively make his voice higher and more nasal to sound, like a teenage boy. As Green has gotten older, it's become more challenging for him to hit those high notes, so the sound engineers often have to digitally adjust his voice in post-production. This is why Chris's voice sometimes sounds slightly different between episodes, depending on how much digital manipulation was required. Here's a fact that connects to real-world events in a weird way. The episode where Peter starts his own political party called the Tea Party Patriots was written and animated before the actual Tea Party movement became prominent in American politics. When the episode aired, many viewers thought it was a commentary on current events, but it was actually just an incredible coincidence. The writers had to add a disclaimer explaining that any similarity to real political movements was purely accidental. Now for something completely different. The Pawtucket Brewery, where Peter works, is based on a real brewery in Rhode Island. Seth MacFarlane grew up in the area and used to drive past the brewery every day. He thought it would be funny to have his lazy cartoon character work at a place that produces something that would make him even lazier. The real brewery owners were initially concerned about being associated with the show, but eventually embraced it when they realized it was bringing them tourists. Let's talk about some of the show's more obscure running gags. You know how Conway Twitty always seems to appear at random moments? This started as an inside joke among the writers who were fans of old country music. They would play Conway Twitty songs during late-night writing sessions to keep themselves awake. Eventually, they decided to work him into the show as a bizarre non sequitur that would confuse viewers and break up the pacing in unexpected ways. The Conway Twitty segments are actually some of the most expensive parts of the show to produce because they have to pay for the music rights. Here's something that'll make you look at Cleveland differently. When Cleveland got his own spin-off show, the original plan was for him to stay in Quahog, and the spin-off would focus on his adventures around town. But the writers realized that would be too limiting, so they created the elaborate storyline where his house gets destroyed and he moves to Virginia. The bathtub falling through multiple houses scene took months to animate and became one of the most memorable moments in the show's history, even though it was essentially just a setup for a spin-off that only lasted 4 seasons. Speaking of spin-offs, did you know that there was almost a Stewie and Brian road trip series? The popularity of their travel episodes convinced executives that the dynamic between the sophisticated baby and the intellectual dog could carry its own show. Scripts were written for 6 episodes before the project was scrapped due to budget concerns. Some of those unused scripts were later reworked into regular Family Guy episodes, which explains why some Stewie and Brian adventures feel more elaborate than usual. Let's get into some animation secrets that most viewers never notice. The way characters' eyes are drawn actually follows a complex mathematical formula to ensure they always look natural when the characters move their heads. This might sound boring, but it's actually fascinating when you realize that most animated shows just wing it and hope for the best. Family Guy's attention to eye movement is part of what makes the characters feel more alive and expressive than typical cartoon characters. Here's a weird fact about the show's merchandising history. The most popular Family Guy product ever sold wasn't a t-shirt or a toy. It was a cookbook called the Family Guy Cookbook that featured recipes supposedly created by each character. Peter's section was all comfort food and beer-based dishes. Lois had elegant dinner party recipes. Stewie contributed sophisticated international cuisine, and Brian's section was dinner for 15, entirely vegetarian. The cookbook actually received positive reviews from real food critics, which nobody expected. Now for some trivia about the show's cancellation and revival that goes beyond what most people know. When Family Guy was first canceled, Seth MacFarlane was actually relieved. He was exhausted from working on the show and wanted to pursue other projects. But the DVD sales were so strong and the fan campaigns so persistent that Fox offered him a deal he couldn't refuse, including complete creative control and a substantial budget increase. This is why the post-cancellation episodes often feel more ambitious and experimental than the early ones. The show's relationship with censors has always been complicated. But here's something most people don't realize. Family Guy actually has one of the most cooperative relationships with network censors of any adult animated show. Seth MacFarlane learned early on that if you give censors multiple options and let them feel like they're part of the creative process, they'll often let you get away with more controversial content. The writers deliberately write jokes they know will get cut, just so they can negotiate to keep the jokes they really want. Let's talk about some character backstories that were developed but never made it into episodes. Quagmire was originally supposed to have a twin brother who was everything he wasn't, completely respectful and monogamous. This character was going to be introduced as a way to explore Quagmire's personality through contrast, but the writers decided it would be funnier to keep him as an irredeemable character without any redemptive family members to soften his edges. Joe Swanson's backstory is much more detailed than what we see on screen. The writers created an entire timeline of his police career before his accident, including the names of his partners, his most famous cases, and even his police academy graduation rank. None of this has ever been mentioned in the show, but it helps the writers keep his character consistent and gives them material to draw from when they need Joe to demonstrate police knowledge or skills. Here's something about the show's music that might surprise you. Every musical number in Family Guy is performed live by the voice actors, even when their characters are supposed to be bad singers. Seth MacFarlane, who has released several jazz albums, insisted on this approach because he believes it makes the musical moments feel more authentic. This means that when Peter sings off-key, Seth MacFarlane is actually deliberately singing badly, which is apparently much harder than just singing well. The relationship between Family Guy and The Simpsons goes deeper than their famous crossover episode. The two shows' writing staffs have been trading jokes and references for years in a friendly rivalry that most viewers never notice. If you watch carefully, you'll spot subtle Simpsons references in Family Guy episodes and vice versa. This tradition started when several Family Guy writers were hired away from The Simpsons, and they maintained friendships with their former colleagues. Now, here's a production fact that explains a lot about the show's pacing. Family Guy episodes are actually written to be about 30 minutes long, but they're edited down to fit the 22-minute television format. This means there are about 8 minutes of content cut from every episode. These deleted scenes aren't just throwaway jokes either. They often contain character development and plot details that would make the episodes feel more complete. Some of these deleted scenes have been released on DVD collections, and they often change how you interpret the episodes. The show's approach to celebrity guest stars is completely different from most animated comedies. Instead of having celebrities play themselves or obvious parodies of themselves, Family Guy often casts them as completely random characters. This creates a fun game for viewers who recognize the voices but can't immediately place where they know them from. Adam West playing the mayor was the template for this approach, and it's been incredibly successful at attracting high-profile guest stars who want to try something different. Let's explore some of the show's more philosophical elements that get overlooked because of all the random humor. The relationship between Stewie and Brian is actually a sophisticated exploration of the friendship between youth and experience. Stewie represents unlimited potential and ambition, while Brian represents the reality of compromise and disappointment that comes with age. Their adventures often end with both characters learning something, but in subtle ways that don't feel preachy or forced. The show's treatment of time travel and alternate realities follows surprisingly consistent rules. The writers created an internal logic system for how these sci-fi elements work in the Family Guy universe, even though they rarely explain it to viewers. This attention to detail is why the time travel episodes feel coherent instead of just random, and it allows them to create genuine consequences for the characters' actions across multiple episodes. Here's something about the animation process that most people never consider. Each episode of Family Guy requires approximately 15,000 individual drawings. The animators have developed shortcuts and techniques to make this process more efficient, but it still takes about 8 months from the initial script to the finished episode. This explains why the show sometimes references events that seem outdated by the time the episode airs. The references were current when the episode was being written and animated. The voice recording process is also more complex than most people realize. While some animated shows record all the voices separately, Family Guy often records the main cast together in the same room. This creates more natural-sounding conversations and allows the actors to play off each other's energy. Seth MacFarlane switches between his different character voices during these sessions, which the other actors say is both impressive and slightly disturbing to witness in person. Now for some trivia about the show's impact on popular culture that goes beyond the obvious memes and catchphrases. Family Guy has been credited with popularizing the rapid-fire pop culture reference style that's now common in comedy. Before Family Guy, most TV shows would make 1 or 2 cultural references per episode. Family Guy started making dozens of references per episode, training audiences to catch quick jokes and creating a more interactive viewing experience. The show's influence on internet culture is also significant. Family Guy was one of the first TV shows to embrace online fan communities and viral marketing. The creators regularly engage with fans on social media and have incorporated fan suggestions into actual episodes. This relationship between creators and fans has become the standard for modern entertainment. But Family Guy was pioneering this approach when most TV executives were still afraid of the internet. Finally, here's a fact that brings everything full circle. Despite all the random humor and bizarre storylines, Family Guy is actually one of the most carefully planned shows on television. Every season has an overarching theme that connects the episodes, even though these themes are subtle enough that most viewers don't consciously notice them. The writers map out character development arcs that span multiple seasons, ensuring that even the most outrageous episodes contribute to larger storytelling goals. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that somewhere in the world, there are people whose full-time job is deciding exactly how long Peter Griffin's fights with a giant chicken should last. Sweet dreams, and may your nights be filled with fewer random cutaway gags than the average Family Guy episode. Picture this. You're scrolling through endless YouTube videos at 2 a.m., your brain craving something familiar yet fascinating to drift off to. Well, buckle up because I've got a treasure trove of Family Guy secrets that'll either help you sleep peacefully or keep you wide awake wondering how this animated chaos machine actually works. From behind-the-scenes drama to mind-bending production facts, these random tidbits about the Griffin family will give your brain exactly what it needs for that perfect sleepy time content. Let me start with something that'll blow your mind right off the bat. The voice of Stewie Griffin, that diabolical baby genius we all know and love, is performed by the show's creator, Seth MacFarlane himself. But here's the kicker that most people don't realize. MacFarlane originally based Stewie's voice on the legendary actor Rex Harrison, who played Professor Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady. That posh, sophisticated British accent that makes Stewie sound like he stepped out of a Victorian manor. It's basically a baby doing an impression of a 1,960 seconds Broadway star. The irony is delicious when you think about it. This character who spends half his time plotting world domination is essentially channeling a musical theater legend. Now, if you think that's wild, wait until you hear about the show's near-death experience that almost prevented it from becoming the cultural phenomenon we know today. Family Guy was actually canceled not once, but twice by Fox. The first cancellation happened in 2002 after just 3 seasons, and for a hot minute there, it looked like the Griffin family was done for good. But then something magical happened that literally brought the show back from the dead. DVD sales and Adult Swim reruns created such a massive fan following that Fox had no choice but to resurrect it in 2005. It's like the show became a zombie that refused to stay buried, clawing its way back to life through sheer fan devotion. The creation story of Family Guy itself reads like something out of a fever dream. Seth MacFarlane was just 24 years old when he pitched the show to Fox, making him one of the youngest people ever to create and run their own animated series for a major network. He literally animated the entire pilot episode by himself, spending months hunched over a desk drawing frame after frame while surviving on probably nothing but coffee and determination. The original pitch was actually inspired by his college thesis film called The Life of Larry, which featured a middle-aged man with a talking dog. Sound familiar? That little student film eventually evolved into the multi-million-dollar empire we know today. Speaking of that talking dog, Brian Griffin holds a special place in animation history for reasons you probably never considered. Unlike most cartoon pets who remain perpetually animal-like, Brian is essentially a human character who just happens to be a dog. He drives cars, drinks martinis, writes novels, and engages in complex philosophical debates. MacFarlane has stated that Brian represents his own voice in the show more than any other character, which explains why the dog often serves as the moral compass of the family. It's basically MacFarlane having conversations with himself through a talking animal, which, when you think about it, is either brilliant or slightly concerning. The show's controversial humor didn't emerge by accident. It was a carefully calculated rebellion against traditional family sitcoms. MacFarlane deliberately set out to create the anti-Simpsons, something that would push every boundary the Simpsons wouldn't touch. Where the Simpsons used gentle satire and heartwarming family moments, Family Guy went nuclear with shock, humor, and deliberately offensive content. The cutaway gags, those random flashback sequences that became the show's signature, were originally MacFarlane's solution to a problem he had with traditional sitcom pacing. He wanted to break free from the constraints of linear storytelling and create something that felt more like channel surfing through a fever dream. Here's a production detail that'll make you appreciate the craft behind the chaos. Each episode of Family Guy takes approximately 10 months to complete, from initial script to final animation. That means the episodes you're watching right now were being worked on almost a year ago. The animation process alone involves hundreds of artists working across multiple studios, with the initial designs created in California before being sent overseas for full animation. It's like a massive international relay race, where each handoff has to be perfect or the whole episode falls apart. The voice acting sessions are apparently legendary affairs that sound more like comedy improv shows than traditional recording sessions. MacFarlane voices not just Stewie, but also Brian, Peter, and Glenn Quagmire, often having entire conversations with himself in the recording booth. The other voice actors have described watching him switch between characters mid-sentence as both impressive and slightly unsettling. Imagine seeing someone argue with themselves in 4 different voices while maintaining perfect character consistency. It's basically like watching a one-man theater performance in real time. One of the most fascinating aspects of Family Guy's production is how the writer's room operates. Unlike many animated shows that plan seasons far in advance, Family Guy's writing process is notoriously chaotic and last-minute. Writers have described sessions where entire episodes get scrapped days before animation begins, leading to frantic rewrites and sleepless nights. This seat-of-the-pants approach actually contributes to the show's unpredictable energy, but it also means that voice actors sometimes receive new scripts literally hours before recording sessions. The show's relationship with censorship has been a constant dance between pushing boundaries and avoiding network wrath. Family Guy has developed an almost scientific approach to testing limits, deliberately writing jokes that are slightly more offensive than what they actually want to air, knowing that network censors will demand cuts. The final version that reaches viewers is often the writer's actual intended content, achieved through strategic overwriting and negotiation. It's psychological warfare, disguised as comedy writing. MacFarlane's musical background plays a much larger role in the show than most people realize. Before creating Family Guy, he was actually a jazz vocalist and pianist, which explains the numerous musical numbers scattered throughout episodes. Those elaborate song and dance sequences aren't just random comedy bits. They're genuine musical theater productions compressed into cartoon format. MacFarlane has stated that he views Family Guy as partly a variety show, using the Griffin family as a framework to showcase different types of entertainment within each episode. The character designs themselves tell an interesting story about animation philosophy. Notice how the Griffin family members all have distinctly different body shapes and facial structures, unlike many cartoon families where everyone looks like variations of the same template. Peter's round, doughy appearance was specifically designed to contrast with Lois's sharp, angular features, while Stewie's football-shaped head was meant to make him instantly recognizable even in silhouette. These design choices weren't arbitrary. They were carefully calculated to ensure each character would be visually distinct even in crowded scenes or quick cuts. Here's something that'll change how you watch the show forever. The infamous chicken fights between Peter and Ernie the Giant Chicken weren't originally planned as recurring segments. The first chicken fight was supposed to be a one-off gag, but the animation team had so much fun creating the over-the-top action sequence that it became a running theme. Those elaborate, destruction-filled battles that seem to last forever? They're essentially the animation team showing off their action sequence skills in a comedy show, like flexing creative muscles that don't usually get exercised in traditional sitcom animation. The show's approach to celebrity guest stars is uniquely twisted compared to other animated series. While most cartoons treat celebrity appearances as special events, with the famous person playing themselves or a character clearly meant to be them, Family Guy often buries celebrity voices in minor roles without any fanfare. A-list actors will voice background characters for single lines, and viewers might never realize they just heard a famous person deliver a throwaway joke. It's the entertainment industry equivalent of hiding expensive ingredients in cheap fast food. Family Guy's international versions reveal fascinating cultural differences in humor. In some countries, entire episodes have been rewritten because the original jokes simply don't translate, not just linguistically, but culturally. What Americans find hilarious might be completely incomprehensible to audiences in other parts of the world, leading to localized versions that are essentially different shows with the same characters. It's like each country gets its own flavor of the Griffin family chaos, tailored to local sensibilities. The merchandising empire built around Family Guy extends into some surprisingly niche markets. Beyond the obvious t-shirts and DVDs, there are Family Guy-themed wine collections, luxury watches, and even high-end collectible sculptures that cost thousands of dollars. The show that built its reputation on lowbrow humor has somehow spawned upscale merchandise that wouldn't look out of place in expensive boutiques. It's cultural cognitive dissonance at its finest. The writing staff includes people from incredibly diverse backgrounds: former stand-up comedians, Harvard graduates, television veterans, and complete newcomers to the industry. This mix creates a unique creative environment where highbrow intellectual humor crashes into street-level comedy instincts. The result is a show that can reference obscure philosophical concepts in one scene and make fart jokes in the next, often within the same episode. Animation errors in Family Guy have become something of a cult fascination among fans. Unlike other shows that try to hide mistakes, Family Guy occasionally leaves obvious animation goofs in the final product, either intentionally, as Easter eggs, or because the production schedule doesn't allow for fixes. These errors have spawned online communities dedicated to spotting and cataloging every miscolored character, floating object, or impossible perspective. It's accidental, interactive entertainment, where viewers become detectives hunting for visual inconsistencies. The show's theme song, that bouncy piano melody everyone knows by heart, was originally much longer and included additional verses that were cut for time. The full version tells a more complete story about the Griffin family's dynamics, but network television's rigid timing requirements forced it down to the bare essentials. MacFarlane has occasionally performed the complete version at live concerts, giving fans a glimpse of what could have been the opening sequence if television had more flexible formatting. Voice acting for animated shows requires a completely different skill set than live-action performance, and Family Guy pushes these demands to extremes. The actors often need to deliver lines while laughing, crying, or even while their characters are supposed to be eating, fighting, or running. This means recording sessions frequently involve voice actors doing physical comedy performances in sound booths, acting out entire scenes with just their voices, while making exaggerated facial expressions that no one will ever see, but that somehow make the vocal performance more authentic. The show's relationship with current events creates unique production challenges. Because episodes take months to complete, jokes about contemporary issues often feel dated by the time they air, leading to a complex balancing act between topical relevance and timeless humor. Writers have developed strategies for creating content that feels current without being tied to specific news cycles. though sometimes they get caught off guard when major events happen during production and their carefully planned episodes suddenly seem tone-deaf or prescient in ways they never intended. Family Guy's influence on internet culture extends far beyond just memes and viral videos. The show's cutaway gag structure essentially predicted how people would consume media in the social media age. Short, disconnected bursts of content that don't require following a linear narrative. Those seemingly random flashbacks that interrupt the main story? They're basically the television equivalent of scrolling through TikTok or Twitter, jumping from one unrelated thought to another without warning. The economics behind Family Guy reveal interesting insights into how modern television actually works. Despite being an animated show with relatively high production costs, it's incredibly profitable because animated content doesn't age the same way live-action shows do. There are no aging actors demanding higher salaries, no physical sets that deteriorate, and no location shoots that become impossible due to changing landscapes. The Griffin family can theoretically exist forever without any of the logistical problems that eventually kill most television series. Behind all the controversy and chaos, Family Guy operates like a massive creative experiment in pushing the boundaries of what television can be. Every episode is essentially asking the question, what if we tried this completely ridiculous thing and somehow made it work within the framework of a family sitcom? Sometimes the experiments fail spectacularly, but when they succeed, they create moments of television that are genuinely unlike anything else on the air. The show has created its own internal mythology that's become increasingly complex over the years. Character relationships, running gags, and callback references have built up layers of continuity that reward longtime viewers while potentially confusing newcomers. It's like a secret club where the membership requirement is having watched hundreds of hours of animated chaos, and the reward is understanding jokes that are incomprehensible to everyone else. And here's perhaps the most interesting fact about Family Guy. Despite all its success and cultural impact, the show remains fundamentally unpredictable. After more than 2 decades on the air, it can still surprise viewers with completely unexpected creative choices, bizarre guest appearances, or experimental episodes that break its own established rules. In a television landscape increasingly dominated by formulaic content, Family Guy maintains a chaotic creativity that keeps audiences guessing what might happen next. So there you have it, a deep dive into the wonderfully weird world behind one of television's most controversial animated families. Whether you're drifting off to sleep or staying wide awake in fascination, these facts reveal just how much complexity hides behind what appears to be simple cartoon chaos. Sweet dreams, and remember, in the Griffin household, normal is just another word for boring. What if I told you that behind the perfect housewife facade lies one of television's most twisted characters? The woman you think you know as the voice of reason in the Griffin household has actually murdered multiple people, cheated on her husband at least 12 times, and may have given birth to a child who isn't even his. This is the untold story of Lois Griffin, and trust me, it's darker than you ever imagined. Most people see Lois as the long-suffering wife who somehow tolerates Peter's antics while keeping their chaotic family together. But that's exactly what she wants you to think. The reality is that Lois Griffin has one of the most disturbing character arcs in animated television, filled with secrets that would make even the most hardened criminal blush. From her privileged upbringing to her descent into madness, every chapter of her life reveals new layers of dysfunction that will completely change how you see this seemingly innocent character. Let me take you back to where it all began. Lois wasn't always a Griffin. She was born Lois Pewterschmidt into one of the most powerful and dysfunctional families on the East Coast. Picture this, a sprawling mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, where money flowed like water, but emotional warmth was as rare as honest politicians. Her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, built an empire on ruthless business practices, while her mother, Babs, played the role of the perfect trophy wife. both too busy with their own ambitions to give their children the love they desperately needed. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Lois had a brother named Patrick, and this family secret will haunt you. As a young child, Patrick witnessed something so traumatic involving his mother that it broke his mind completely. Carter's solution wasn't therapy or family healing. He had his own son shipped off to a mental institution and erased from family history like he never existed. This wasn't just neglect. This was calculated, emotional brutality that would set the tone for how this family handled problems, make them disappear. Growing up in this environment, Lois and her sister Carol developed completely different survival mechanisms. Carol became desperate for male attention, rushing into relationship after relationship, collecting divorces like trophies. By the time we meet her, she's been married and divorced 8 times. Each failed relationship a symptom of the emotional void their parents created. But Lois chose a different path. Rebellion disguised as conformity. As a teenager, Lois discovered a passion for modeling. For once, she had found something that made her feel alive, something that was hers. But when a legitimate modeling contract was offered, Carter crushed her dreams without hesitation. His exact words were chilling. His daughter would not lower herself to such work. This wasn't parental protection. This was control, masked as concern for social status. And this moment planted the first seeds of the resentment that would later explode into her adult dysfunction. College became Lois's escape hatch, but instead of finding freedom, she found chaos. At Kent State University, she threw herself into everything her controlling father had forbidden. She partied with reckless abandon, broke every rule she could find, and made choices that would haunt her for decades. The most shocking of these was starring in an adult film, not for money or fame, but as the ultimate act of rebellion against her family's pristine image. Think about the psychology here. This wasn't some wild phase or momentary lapse in judgment. This was a young woman so damaged by emotional neglect and control that she was willing to do anything to feel like she had agency over her own life. The fact that she shared this secret so casually with a reporter she barely knew tells us everything about her desperate need for authenticity in a life built on lies and appearances. But the real bombshell comes when we examine how she met Peter Griffin. Here's where the story becomes almost too bizarre to believe. Peter wasn't some college boyfriend or family friend. He was literally hired as a pool boy to clean her family's estate. Picture the scene. The refined daughter of a billionaire family falls for a man whose greatest talent is making fart jokes. On the surface, it looks like a classic opposites attract romance. But dig deeper, and you'll see the psychological warfare at play. Lois choosing Peter wasn't love at first sight. It was the nuclear option in her war against her father's expectations. Carter had controlled every aspect of her life, from her career choices to her social circle. So she chose the one person guaranteed to horrify him, a working-class man with zero social graces and fewer brain cells. This wasn't romance. This was revenge, with wedding vows. When Carter discovered their relationship, his reaction was swift and brutal. He had Peter knocked, unconscious and dumped in the middle of the ocean like some kind of mob hit. But Peter survived, and here's where things get interesting. Carter then offered Peter $1 million to walk away forever. Peter's response reveals something crucial about their dynamic. He turned down the money, claiming Lois was worth more to him than cash. But his exact words were telling. He said she was worthless to him, which is why he loved her. This wasn't the romantic declaration it appeared to be. This was two damaged people finding each other through mutual dysfunction. Peter saw in Lois someone who wouldn't judge his failures because she was running from her own. Lois saw in Peter the ultimate weapon against her family's suffocating expectations. Their love story wasn't built on compatibility or shared values. It was built on shared rebellion against the lives they were supposed to live. The cracks in this foundation became obvious almost immediately. When they tried to start fresh, after college, they broke up. Lois got engaged to Tom Tucker, a much more logical choice that her family approved of. But Peter couldn't let go.
Not because of love, but because losing Lois meant losing his identity as the rebel who stole the rich girl. So he crashed her wedding in a desperate last-ditch effort to reclaim what he saw as his greatest achievement. What happened next reveals the true toxicity of their relationship. Lois was already pregnant with Meg when they eloped, which means their entire marriage was built on necessity rather than choice. She literally couldn't back out even if she wanted to. This detail reframes their entire relationship. Every fight, every moment of dysfunction, every terrible decision can be traced back to this moment when two people trapped themselves in a marriage neither really wanted. Parenthood didn't fix their problems. It amplified them exponentially. Their first instinct as new parents was to abandon Meg at a fire station. When that failed, they took her home to Spooner Street, but the damage was already done. This child represented everything wrong with their relationship. Unplanned, unwanted, and a constant reminder of the life neither had chosen. As more children arrived, Lois's parenting style became increasingly unhinged. With Meg, she started as a protective mother, but gradually became cruel and dismissive. The most heartbreaking example is when Meg pours her heart out, telling Lois she loves her, and Lois can't bring herself to say it back. This isn't just poor parenting. This is emotional abandonment that mirrors her own childhood trauma. But Meg isn't the only victim of Lois's maternal dysfunction. She's physically abused Stewie, getting so desperate for pills that she dunked his head in a toilet to retrieve one that fell in. She ran over him with her car and immediately tried to cover it up, rather than face the consequences. These aren't accidents or momentary lapses. They're patterns of behavior that reveals someone completely detached from normal parental instincts. Even with Chris, supposedly her favorite, she's done things that cross every line of appropriate motherly behavior. When rumors spread that he was involved with an attractive teacher, instead of shutting down the inappropriate speculation, she confirmed it herself. This isn't protective parenting. This is a woman so desperate for attention that she'll exploit her own children to get it. The drug addiction storyline reveals just how far Lois has fallen from her privileged upbringing. This isn't recreational use or social experimentation. This is full-blown addiction that turns her into a criminal. She starts dealing drugs, becomes a kleptomaniac, and eventually graduates to violent crime. The woman who grew up in mansions is now poisoning baristas and kidnapping innocent people to maintain her position as the best customer at a coffee shop. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Lois's character is her complete moral flexibility. She runs for mayor claiming to fight corruption, then immediately becomes as corrupt as the person she replaced. She allows oil companies to dump waste in the city's water supply for money. This isn't political compromise. This is selling out an entire community for personal gain. Her relationship with violence is equally troubling. She's admitted to killing multiple people, including a waitress on their honeymoon as part of some sick game with Peter. She traumatized Chris by revealing she'd killed someone with her car, then casually mentioned that all mothers have killed someone, as if murder was just another household chore. The pattern becomes clear when you look at her complete story. Every major decision in Lois's life has been driven by one of two motives: rebelling against her family's expectations, or covering up the consequences of previous rebellions. She chose Peter to spite her father. She had children because she was trapped. She became addicted to drugs to cope with her choices. She turned to crime to support her addictions. Each step led inevitably to the next in a downward spiral that shows no signs of stopping. Her infidelity adds another layer to this psychological profile. Lois hasn't just cheated on Peter occasionally. She's been systematically unfaithful throughout their entire marriage. She's had affairs with Bill Clinton, rock stars from the 80s, and even Peter's own half-brother. The most shocking revelation is her admission that Chris might not even be Peter's biological son, the result of an affair with actor Philip Seymour Hoffman. This isn't a woman struggling with temptation. This is someone who views marriage vows as suggestions rather than commitments. Her pattern of cheating reveals someone incapable of genuine intimacy, constantly seeking validation from new partners because she's never resolved the emotional damage from her childhood. The psychological implications become Even more disturbing when you consider her relationships with Brian and Quagmire. Both men have been obsessed with her for years, and in alternate timelines, she's married both of them. This suggests that her appeal isn't based on genuine connection, but on some kind of emotional unavailability that draws damaged men to her like moths to a flame. Her bisexual tendencies, while potentially representing healthy sexual exploration, fit the same pattern. She kisses women impulsively, fantasizes about running away with female cashiers, and engages in passionate encounters with friends' wives. But these aren't expressions of genuine sexual identity. They're more rebellion, more ways to shock and transgress against social expectations. As Lois ages, the consequences of her choices begin catching up with her. By her 50th birthday, doctors are warning she might not survive much longer due to the physical toll of her lifestyle and the violence she's experienced. Stewie planted a time bomb in her uterus as an infant, and Chris nearly killed her during childbirth. These details aren't just dark humor. They're metaphors for how her own children have become weapons turned against her, the inevitable result of her toxic parenting. The future episodes show Lois and Peter still together in their retirement home. But this isn't a happy ending. It's two people too damaged and codependent to separate, even when they probably should. Their adult children push them into assisted living, suggesting that even as grown-ups, the Griffin kids can't wait to get their parents out of their lives. But here's what makes Lois truly fascinating as a character. She's not entirely unsympathetic. Every terrible thing she's done can be traced back to the emotional neglect and control she experienced as a child. Her father crushed her dreams and treated her like a possession. Her mother was absent and cold. Her brother was literally erased from family history when he became inconvenient. Is it any wonder she grew up incapable of healthy relationships or appropriate boundaries? The tragedy of Lois Griffin isn't that she became a terrible person. It's that she never had a real chance to become anything else. Every relationship in her life has been transactional or manipulative. She learned early that love comes with conditions and that people will abandon you if you become inconvenient. So she became someone who abandons others first, who cheats before being cheated on, who hurts before being hurt. Her criminal behavior isn't random chaos. It's the logical endpoint of a life spent learning that rules don't apply to people with money and power. Her father built an empire through ruthless business practices and made problems disappear through violence and money. Is it surprising that his daughter grew up thinking murder and corruption were just more extreme versions of normal problem solving? The drug addiction storyline reveals someone desperately trying to numb the pain of a life she never wanted. The cheating shows someone searching for connection she's never experienced. The violent outbursts demonstrate someone who learned early that force and manipulation get better results than honesty and vulnerability. Even her relationship with Peter, dysfunctional as it is, represents her attempt to break free from the toxic patterns of her childhood. She chose someone completely different from her father, someone who couldn't control or manipulate her through money or social pressure. The problem is that she chose someone equally damaged, someone whose emotional instability matched her own. The most disturbing aspect of Lois's story is how it reflects real-world patterns of generational trauma. Children who grow up in emotionally abusive environments often struggle to form healthy relationships as adults. They may seek out partners who replicate familiar patterns of dysfunction because chaos feels like home. They may become abusive parents themselves, not out of malice, but because they never learned healthy parenting models. Lois's story is a masterclass in how privilege can't protect children from emotional damage. All the money in the world couldn't give her what she really needed. Parents who loved her unconditionally and supported her dreams. Instead, she got parents who treated her like a business asset and a social accessory, valued only for how she reflected on their reputation. The brilliance of her character lies in how the show presents her as both victim and villain simultaneously. Yes, she's done terrible things that hurt innocent people. But understanding why she did them doesn't excuse the behavior. It explains how someone becomes capable of such actions. She's a cautionary tale about what happens when children don't receive the emotional foundation they need to become healthy adults. Her relationship with her own children reflects this cycle of dysfunction. She can't give them what she never received herself. Her inability to say "I love you" to Meg isn't just cruelty. It's the echo of parents who never said those words to her. Her physical abuse of Stewie mirrors the emotional violence she experienced growing up. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Lois's character is how normal she appears on the surface. She's articulate, intelligent, and socially skilled when she needs to be. She can play the role of the concerned mother, the devoted wife, the responsible citizen. This ability to present a functional facade while being completely broken inside makes her more dangerous than someone whose dysfunction is obvious. The show's genius lies in slowly revealing the depths of her damage over time. Early episodes presented her as the reasonable one, the moral center of the family. But as the series progressed, each new revelation stripped away another layer of that facade until we saw the broken person underneath. This isn't character assassination. It's archaeological excavation, uncovering the psychological damage that was always there but carefully hidden. Looking at Lois Griffin's complete story, we see a masterpiece of character development that illustrates how childhood trauma can echo through generations. She's not just a cartoon character making bad choices for laughs. She's a complex psychological portrait of someone whose entire life has been shaped by early emotional wounds that never healed. Her story serves as a dark mirror to the American dream, showing how wealth and privilege can create their own forms of destruction. The Pewterschmidt family had everything money could buy, but nothing that actually mattered. And their daughter grew up to become living proof that you can't buy emotional health or authentic human connection. The most disturbing realization about Lois Griffin is that she's not an anomaly. She's a recognizable type. We all know people who seem to have everything together on the surface, but whose personal lives are complete disasters. We see them in positions of power, making decisions that affect others while being completely incapable of managing their own emotional lives. Lois Griffin's entire story is a cautionary tale about the price of emotional neglect and the generational transmission of trauma. She started as a victim of her parents' dysfunction and became the architect of her children's future therapy bills. Her legacy isn't the crimes she's committed or the people she's hurt. It's the cycle of damage that will likely continue through her own children unless they find ways to break free from the patterns she's established. In the end, Lois Griffin represents one of television's most complex and disturbing character studies. She's simultaneously the victim of generational trauma and the perpetrator of new trauma, a woman whose entire life has been shaped by her unsuccessful attempts to escape the emotional prison her parents built around her childhood. Understanding her story doesn't excuse her actions, but it does explain how someone becomes capable of such systematic dysfunction while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. The brilliance of her character lies not in the shocking things she does, but in how those actions reflect deeper patterns of psychological damage that make perfect sense once you understand where she came from. She's not crazy. She's the logical product of her environment, which makes her story both more tragic and more terrifying than any random acts of villainy could ever be. What if I told you that one cartoon dad has a higher body count than most movie villains? Today we're diving deep into the chaotic world of Peter Griffin and counting every single person this animated maniac has eliminated. Trust me, the numbers are absolutely insane. Most people think Peter Griffin is just a lovable goofball who makes stupid mistakes. But when you actually sit down and track his actions across hundreds of Family Guy episodes, a terrifying pattern emerges. This isn't just some clumsy dad bumbling through life. This is a walking disaster zone who leaves destruction wherever he goes. I spent weeks combing through every Family Guy episode, taking notes, rewinding scenes, and meticulously documenting each incident. What I discovered shocked me. Peter Griffin isn't just accidentally dangerous. He's legitimately one of the most prolific killers in television history. And the worst part? He never faces any real consequences. Let's start from the very beginning with Peter's first confirmed elimination. In only the second episode of the entire series, Peter runs down the Roadrunner from Looney Tunes while driving, just flattens the poor bird completely. When asked if he hit something, Peter casually dismisses it and keeps driving. That casual attitude toward taking a life, it sets the tone for everything that follows. The very next episode, things escalate dramatically. A tour bus pulls up to the Griffin house, and Peter completely loses his mind. He grabs a shotgun and opens fire on the entire vehicle. 3 people eliminated just like that. His reaction to seeing strangers at his door was immediate violence. No questions asked. No attempt at communication. Just grab a weapon and start shooting. Then there's the hospital incident that really showcases Peter's dangerous incompetence. Somehow this man was allowed to work as a doctor, which should have been a red flag for everyone involved. During what appears to be a routine procedure, Peter's negligence directly leads to a patient's death. The fact that he was even permitted near medical equipment shows a serious breakdown in the system. But Peter's killing spree really picks up steam when he temporarily takes over Death's job. With supernatural powers at his disposal, Peter becomes exponentially more dangerous. He kills 2 airline pilots mid-flight simply by touching them. Thousands of passengers could have died if not for quick thinking from another character who managed to land the plane. Peter's reaction to nearly causing a massive aviation disaster? He jokes about needing mittens. The pattern becomes clear early on. Peter has zero regard for human life and even less understanding of consequences. When tasked with simple babysitting duties, he leaves an infant to drown in a bathtub. His parenting instincts are so fundamentally broken that he can't even keep a baby alive for one evening. Speaking of children, Peter's relationship with kids is consistently disturbing. When he briefly works as a nanny dressed up like Mary Poppins, 2 children end up dead and hidden under a bed. These weren't accidents or misunderstandings. Peter's presence in any childcare situation inevitably leads to tragedy. But the really chilling moments come when Peter turns his violence toward his own family. In one episode, his negligence with home repairs leads to carbon monoxide poisoning that kills Lois, Chris, and Meg. Even though they're miraculously fine in the next episode, Peter's actions directly cause their deaths. A husband and father who accidentally kills his entire family should be traumatized for life. Peter just moves on like nothing happened. The mob-style execution of Brian over some leftover food shows Peter's capacity for cold-blooded murder. When his dog eats his chicken and drinks his cream soda, Peter responds with gangster-level violence. The casual way he eliminates a family member over such trivial matters reveals the true depth of his sociopathic tendencies. Peter's parenting philosophy seems to involve extreme violence as conflict resolution. When his daughter faces bullying at school, instead of speaking to teachers or parents, Peter takes matters into his own hands. The bully doesn't survive the encounter. Later, when presenting what he thinks is the bully's head to his son, Peter admits he got the wrong kid entirely. He murdered an innocent deaf child by mistake and shows no remorse whatsoever. The axe murder of Cleveland represents a turning point where Peter's violence becomes increasingly graphic and disturbing. This isn't cartoon slapstick anymore. This is genuine horror movie material. The casual way Peter wields deadly weapons against friends and neighbors shows a complete break from reality and basic human decency. From this point forward, Peter's methods become increasingly brutal, and his body count starts climbing exponentially. The chainsaw massacres alone account for dozens of victims. Peter goes from house to house like a serial killer, methodically eliminating anyone in his path. The fact that he seems to enjoy this level of violence makes it even more disturbing. One of the most senseless killings involves Peter murdering a child just to steal a jet ski. When his family points out they're literally standing next to their boat, Peter ignores them and commits homicide anyway. This isn't about necessity or even twisted logic. This is pure evil masked as comedy. The restaurant incident where Peter kills a woman named Erica while trying to prove his cooking skills demonstrates how his ego and incompetence create deadly combinations. Peter's need to show off constantly puts innocent people in mortal danger. Peter's involvement in sports inevitably leads to casualties. Every athletic activity he participates in somehow results in someone's death. Whether it's shot put, treasure hunting, or any other recreational activity, Peter transforms harmless fun into lethal encounters. The drunk driving incidents reveal another layer of Peter's criminal behavior. He openly admits to calculating exactly how much alcohol he can consume while still being able to drive. This premeditated approach to endangering others shows Peter knows his actions are dangerous, but simply doesn't care about the consequences. The Boston Marathon Massacre stands out as one of Peter's most heinous acts. Running down dozens of innocent runners during a major sporting event crosses the line from accidental violence into mass murder territory. The casualty count from this single incident rivals actual terrorist attacks. Peter's racism leads to deadly encounters as well. His casual bigotry creates situations where innocent people lose their lives simply for existing in Peter's presence. The Anthropology store incident perfectly captures how Peter's prejudices fuel his violent tendencies. When Peter briefly becomes death incarnate, his kill count skyrockets through supernatural means. Having the literal power of life and death in Peter's hands is like giving a nuclear weapon to a toddler. The pilots who die simply from Peter's touch represent just the beginning of the carnage. The hospital bombings showcase Peter's evolution into full-scale terrorism. Destroying entire medical facilities because he disagrees with vaccines makes Peter an anti-science extremist willing to commit mass murder for his beliefs. The estimated casualty counts from these attacks reach into the hundreds. Peter's accidental involvement with actual terrorists leads to multiple explosive incidents. His friendship with a terrorist operative results in several bombings throughout the city. Even when Peter tries to do the right thing by helping authorities, he ends up triggering more explosions that kill dozens of innocent people. The secret society incident demonstrates Peter's capacity for large-scale destruction. Burning down an entire facility housing historical documents leads to hundreds of deaths. Peter's inability to consider consequences means every action he takes has the potential for massive collateral damage. The presidential fight with Donald Trump represents the peak of Peter's destructive potential. Their brawl triggers nuclear missile launches that devastate multiple population centers. The casualty count from this single incident reaches into the thousands. Peter literally causes acts of war through his inability to control his temper. But none of Peter's individual acts of violence compare to his ongoing feud with Ernie the Giant Chicken. This running conflict has resulted in more deaths and destruction than actual wars. Every encounter between these two characters leaves dozens of innocent bystanders dead. Their first major battle destroys multiple vehicles, causes plane crashes, and brings down entire buildings. The Ferry wheel incident alone accounts for hundreds of casualties, as the massive structure rolls through populated areas. Their fights aren't contained conflicts between two individuals. They're citywide disasters that claim enormous numbers of innocent lives. The cruise ship battle represents the most destructive single incident in their ongoing war. When their fight moves into the engine room, they lose control of a massive passenger vessel that crashes into a major city. The resulting destruction levels multiple city blocks and kills hundreds of people. This single incident qualifies as one of the worst maritime disasters in history. Their time travel battle creates paradoxes that threaten the fabric of reality itself. When Peter and Ernie use time manipulation technology to continue their fight across multiple historical periods, they create cascading effects that alter the course of human history. The scientist who created the time machine becomes an early casualty of their temporal warfare. The NASA facility destruction shows how their conflict has escalated beyond Earth itself. Their space battle crashes back to the planet and destroys an ocean oil rig, adding environmental disaster to their already impressive list of crimes against humanity. The reverse time sequence battle creates some of the most confusing and deadly encounters in their entire conflict. When everything starts happening backwards, the destruction becomes even more widespread and incomprehensible. Plane crashes, building collapses, and mass casualties all blend together in a chaotic symphony of violence. When you calculate the total casualties from just the Peter versus Ernie conflicts, the number reaches nearly 1,500 deaths. This means half of Peter's entire body count comes from a single ongoing dispute that started over an expired coupon. The fact that such trivial origins led to such massive destruction perfectly encapsulates Peter's character. The crossover episode with The Simpsons showcases Peter's ability to bring his destructive tendencies to other fictional universes. His fight with Homer Simpson levels significant portions of Springfield and adds another 100 casualties to his count. Even when visiting other shows, Peter cannot help but create mayhem and death. Throughout all of these incidents, certain patterns emerge that make Peter's behavior even more disturbing. He shows no remorse for any of his actions. He never learns from his mistakes or attempts to modify his behavior. Most importantly, he faces no meaningful consequences for any of his crimes. The legal system in Peter's universe seems completely incapable of holding him accountable. Despite committing mass murder on multiple occasions, Peter continues to walk free and repeat his destructive patterns. This creates a world where violence has no consequences and human life has no value. Peter's family and friends enable his behavior by treating his mass murder sprees as minor inconveniences rather than serious crimes. When someone consistently kills innocent people, the appropriate response is not to laugh it off and wait for the next episode. The normalization of Peter's violence makes everyone around him complicit in his crimes. The media within Peter's world also fails to adequately report on his actions. Despite causing multiple disasters that should dominate news cycles for months, Peter's crimes are quickly forgotten and life returns to normal. This unrealistic portrayal of consequences sends dangerous messages about accountability and justice. When you add up every death directly attributable to Peter Griffin's actions, the final count reaches approximately 2,800 people. This makes him one of the most prolific killers in entertainment history. For context, this body count exceeds many actual historical mass murderers and rivals casualty figures from major military conflicts. The fact that this level of violence is presented as comedy raises serious questions about desensitization to violence in media. When mass murder becomes a punchline, society loses important moral boundaries that separate acceptable behavior from criminal acts. Peter Griffin represents the logical extreme of consequence-free violence in entertainment. His character demonstrates what happens when someone with destructive tendencies faces no accountability for their actions. The result is escalating violence that eventually reaches genocidal proportions. The most disturbing aspect of Peter's character is how his violence is often portrayed as justified or at least understandable. Whether defending his family, pursuing his goals, or simply satisfying his curiosity, Peter's murderous actions are presented within contexts that make them seem reasonable to viewers. This normalization of extreme violence has real-world implications for how audiences process and respond to actual violence in their daily lives. When fictional characters commit mass murder without consequences, it becomes easier to dismiss real violence as less serious than it actually is. The Peter Griffin phenomenon also reveals how comedy can be used to mask serious social problems. By presenting his violent tendencies as humorous character quirks rather than serious mental health issues, the show avoids confronting the deeper implications of his behavior. In conclusion, Peter Griffin's body count of 2,800 people makes him one of the deadliest characters in television history. His casual approach to mass murder, combined with the complete lack of consequences he faces, creates a character who embodies the worst aspects of unchecked violence and social irresponsibility. While Family Guy presents his actions as comedy, the sheer scale of death and destruction he causes reveals a character who belongs in prison rather than primetime television.